Record show all board members are present. We have our cabinet. So, all right. So, Nikki, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, good morning. And I just want to make sure you're all seeing the Higley USD slide. Perfect. All right, let me move my mouse. There it is. Okay, so we did introductions last time, so I got to know all of you, and I'm sure your community is probably pretty familiar with you right now. So we will do a little bit of an icebreaker just because it's morning and we want to get going. But we're going to be setting the stage and just preparing ourselves because we're going to be talking about some communication protocols. And this is a learning and growing experience for a number of reasons. One is because you have new board members, right? So that will be some of these things. I went ahead and we're going to go through what we call the communication transitions and protocols workbook, which is a really long name, communication protocols. I sent it to Dr. Foley ahead of time just to see, is there any practices that you already do when it comes to communication? And if there's not anything, stated or traditionally what you do, we will kind of come together around those today so that everybody's on the same page. And the growing part comes because sometimes what was working isn't, what's going to work going forward. And maybe with new people, or you find that you need to have a new process or come to a different agreement. So we're just going to go through some protocols today and settle on something that works for you. So I think today I have a fun game. But we started a little late, so I'm kind of afraid to do that. So we'll see how we do on time. I might do it at the end. But instead, what I'd like you to do is just quickly think about what's your biggest challenge when it comes to communications with the district. Is it not knowing when something is going to come? Is it getting different types of communication from different people in cabinet, meaning like when you get reports for them, some people's reports have a ton of information and some have just a little. Is it interacting with staff or parents or community members? So just think about what's been the toughest thing for you in terms of communication.
Do you want some feedback here or?
Yeah, I was just going to give you a minute to think of something and then we would start sharing.
Perfect.
If you're ready to share, Christina, you can first.
Well, I just in general, there's so much we do now that's different. When you were mentioning different communications from different people, and Dr. Foley's done a great job with our status report on getting it from others to make sure we get all the same format and consistent communication, because in the past we have not. So that's been a struggle until Dr. Foley's wrapped it all together.
Great. So that's something that's going well in terms of the communication. That's great.
And I think as board members in general, and our new board members will experience this too, is the frustration is we can't communicate with each other. So, just in general, although it's a different type of communication, I know board members really struggle with um, not being able to communicate with each other, that you can talk to one person and that's it. So
I agree. I think that's the hardest struggle. Because a lot of times you find out something in a board meeting and it changes your mindset on how you might vote, or because we can't talk to each other and know that information sometimes.
well, and also I think we're also so afraid to talk to each other that we may be in violation of open meeting law, even though it may not pertain to the open meeting law, that things within our district, our board members aren't able to talk to each other. So I think there's things that happen with other communication tools and parts that aren't addressed because board members aren't, we all don't know different, we all know different things, and we don't know what others don't know. So
If I could pipe in a little bit, I think another challenge for me as a board member is having personal relationships with people within the district and hearing things and then going, is that really happening? And not knowing that that was happening or not happening from a district level. So sometimes I get caught up in the personal relationships of people and wanting to navigate that road very carefully.
Great. Anybody have something different than what we've talked about? So hearing not any additions, let me just go through some of these concerns. And I think that having some protocols in place will definitely help with that. Some of the things that you mentioned, we won't necessarily go in, wasn't on the communication protocol list, but definitely things that we can talk about. The first thing I want to talk about is the ability to communicate with the board, and that is a big challenge. I want to remind folks, one thing that somebody said is we hear things at the board meeting for the first time. That is by design. You are not supposed to talk about things ahead of time because you're not supposed to come to the board meeting with a decision already in your head. So if you're coming to the board already knowing exactly how everybody's thinking and feeling about a topic, then you've done something wrong. The idea is that you come to a board meeting and you are for the first time hearing information when other people are hearing it, and you have a discussion there. Because the board meeting is supposed to be in the public. The public is supposed to understand your thought process, your questionings, the things that you're learning as you're learning them. So that might feel uncomfortable, but that is by design. If you come to the meeting without having a preset agenda of how you're going to vote for something or what you're going to say about that, and you say it, that's when other board members can say, yes, I feel that too. Or, did you think about this? And you go, oh, I didn't. Now that changes how I think about how I'm going to vote. That's exactly how it's supposed to play out. So I know that that part is uncomfortable, but that is by design. I mean, that's why the open meeting law is so strict, because they want you to be coming to conclusions in that public space, learning about things and asking questions at that public space so the community can see the process.
Nikki,
However,
can I ask a question?
Hold on, let me just get through
Okay.
what I was saying, and then I'll let you ask a question.
Okay.
The next thing I wanted to say is that you can really utilize things like this, the study sessions, to talk about topics. A lot of people don't want to invest in the time to have this kind of study session or work session or learning study, whatever you want to call it. They're all meetings by different names, but in this kind of meeting, it's not an agendized meeting of specific topics. So you can say, we're going to talk about employee relations, or we're going to talk about whatever the topic is. And that gives you a space as a board to talk about something without making a decision on a specific agenda item. So I would really utilize these study sessions. I think some people think that it's like a retreat and it should only happen once or twice a year. Study sessions are really for that, for digging in and trying to come to some understanding and getting some information before maybe a decision is going to be made. So that's one thing that I would tell you. The other thing that you have available to you is the superintendent. So if you learn some information, it's probably better that you don't share with everyone, because that should be funneled by the superintendent. I'll give you an example. I have parents, I'm a parent in my district. I have the parents of my kids' friends that'll sometimes come to me. I have to be really careful, because just because they told me a principal or a teacher is doing X, Y, and Z, if I take that information and I want to share that with the board, even if I shared it and nobody responded, I wouldn't be violating open meeting law unless somebody starts chiming in. So I wouldn't recommend doing a reply off like that. But that's not really fair, because it hasn't been investigated. That's the superintendent's job to make sure that information gets to the board that's relevant for their decision making. So I would always take information that you get to the superintendent, because then she can send that out to the board. A board member received information on this. We're looking into that situation. Should any of you other folks get the information? So when you come across that information and you don't know if everybody has it, or you think that everybody should have it, throw it towards your superintendent, because that's what she's there for, is to share that out. It's not appropriate for board members to do that. So with that, I think it was Michelle that had a question.
I just wanted to clarify, these are, when you're talking about coming in without information, that's for items to be voted on, or can informational items that won't be voted on, can you have discussions about prior to with your superintendent or administration?
Yes, when I say I mean, you don't necessarily come into the meeting already knowing what other people think. The idea is that you don't already know how people, now with working with each other, you probably have an idea of where people are going to fall on certain issues, but you definitely, it's not intended for you to know exactly how everybody's going to fall on every vote. You definitely want to get information from the superintendent ahead of time if you have questions. And then if there's questions, like what I do sometimes is if I have questions, I'll decide what is just something that I needed to understand or what I think is important for the community to understand. If I think it's something that'll be confusing to the whole community and that they would care to know it, you know, not something like sometimes some budget issues are confusing for the whole community, but I don't think the community cares, I'm not going to re-ask some of those questions. But there are some where, you know, for example, we just passed, we got a 21st century, we picked 5 schools. We have 32 schools. And so I asked the question beforehand so that I wasn't surprising them of what was the criteria and why did we land on these 5 schools. And then I asked that question again in the meeting so that our community would know, our fellow board members would know if they didn't already. So that's kind of where, yeah, you do come in with some information ahead of time if you're getting it from administration. If you heard something, you definitely want to throw it through administration before you you come to the board table and lay it out. One of the worst things that I've seen is somebody's, you know, coming on the board dais and said, well, I heard that the principal at such and such school is doing suching, you know, at the dais for the first time, everybody's hearing it, because that's not really fair to your staff. It's not fair to your superintendent who looks like, you know, they might've been in the know the whole time. So you want to be careful about those kinds of things. And those are the types of things that you want to ask ahead of time. Okay, so I'm glad we answered some of those questions. I hope some of the suggestions that I provided help in terms of how you can get through that. You know, it's not going to be as easy as, yeah, you can just talk to people. You know, that's just not how it's done. But there are tools in order for you to create a space that is approved to have a conversation, and you have a huge resource in your superintendent in order to share information. Then she just has to be careful that she's not pulling the board or trying to see how people feel about the information before the meeting. She's really just giving the information. She's not there to collect responses or feedback. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So this is going to be more of a conversational meeting. I am going to share a lot of information, but we will be asking for input because this is something that when we start working on these protocols, we want to come to a consensus around it. We're not making any decisions today. This is not an agendized item of action. This is really just talking through current processes and practices, talking about what you'd like to see. I'm going to take notes, as I'm sure Dr. Foley and others will be taking notes. And then when at the end of this time, we'll be on the same page around some things, or have identified a couple things where we need to dig deeper. And then that should then come before the board and an action item so that you can adopt your protocols. And throughout this training, if you have questions, go ahead and let me know that. You can either unmute or you can send me a chat. I may ask you to wait till we get to the next spot because it's something that's going to come up. But you can definitely ask questions. I will check every now and then to see where people are because I know some people are more thought process and they're not going to be the first one with their opinion. I do want to hear from everyone. So if we move past something, please feel free to use the chat to say, you know what, I did have an idea on that. Don't feel like, oh, my time has passed, I can't make a comment. Because I know that people process information differently and there's different levels of comfort in terms of jumping in and adding things. So Any questions there? Okay. All right, so let's get into it. Good communication is the bridge between confusion and clarity. A lot of hurt feelings and a lot of drama can come from a lack of communication, right? Because when we don't have good communication, our brains need to make that bridge. And so they fill in the bridge with their own assumptions, which can or cannot be helpful. I'm sure, you know, a lot of you have been in situations where somebody filled in the blank for you and that led to a problem. And so it's really important that you have good communication and that communication is flowing, because in the absence of that, our brains are designed to fill in the holes. And we will fill them in either with gossip or things that we heard from the community or our own kind of internal dialogue. And one thing that we've seen in human nature is when there's a question mark, our brains for some reason like to fill it in with the negative stuff. We like to fill it in with fear and worst case scenarios. There's this great example that if the boss says, hey, you know, I want you to come into my office this afternoon. The first thing you think is, this is going to be terrible. What did I do? What happened? What's wrong, right? Because our brains are designed to go to the negative. They could have just said, hey, I'm giving you a raise, or hey, I just want to let you know what a great job you did on that. Now that has a lot to do with your previous history with that person. And that's an important piece to remember with communication is some of you have a history with one another and some of you don't. And so the type of communication that you have going forward is going to be colored by those previous relationships. So one of the things I want you to think about as we're going through this is, are there people on this team that I've had miscommunication with, or have had maybe something that didn't rub me the right way that causes me to maybe fill in those blanks in a more negative space? Are there people on this team that I usually assume positive intent and I fill this blanks in with what I assume they probably meant, you know? And having that list of people, that'll kind of give you a space of how you're perceiving communication coming from them, and an opportunity for you to pause and try to take it in the best intent possible, so that when you have questions, you're framing it in a question and not an allegation, if that makes sense. So I do want to direct you to your own policies. I'm not sure, I didn't check Higley's, but most people have kept the copyrighted ASBA policies. Some people tinker with their policies a little bit and that comes off, but you should have in your policy manual policies around how you communicate with the staff members and the public, what to do with concerns or complaints. If you were in Bolt, I don't know if any of you are attending the Bolts training, but we just did it yesterday. We'll be doing it again on the 12th. We went into these in particular. It is so very important for you to understand some, and I highlighted a few of them here because they're pretty common. It's so important for you as board members to know what the policy is, because you adopted this policy. These are your policies. And if you're not following the policy, why should anybody else? And if you're not following the policy in terms of these, some people will say, well, I follow policy, I just didn't do it in this one time. Well, you know, then are we saying to our staff, well, you can follow some of the policies when you feel like it and some of them not, you know? So it's important for you to demonstrate that you're following policy. Not only because that's the ethical thing to do, because you approve these policies, and if you expect other people to do them, you need to do them yourselves, but because there's an equity issue at play as well. If you're not following your practices and protocols consistently, and there leads to inequities, right? If for example, again, with my friends, my kids' friends, parents, if I take their complaints straight to the superintendent instead of telling them, well, did you try to work it out with the teacher? Did you try to work it out with the principal? They get better access than anybody else. And that's not fair. That's not equitable. If I take the 3 emails that I got that were upset about a certain situation, and I take that as, well, 3 people told me it, so it must be true. What about the other 300 families or parents that didn't say anything about that? Do we just act on that communication alone, or do we give it to the superintendent to investigate before we make our decisions and assumptions about what really went on? So you can see how the equity issue here is really big, but it's also a legal issue, because again, if you take information and you go out of, you don't follow your own policy and practices, it can come back to bite you as a district, because you could get yourself sued, or if you're trying to terminate somebody and it comes out that board members were involved with the investigation early on, they're going to say, well, you aren't impartial and he shouldn't, or she shouldn't have been terminated because you all weren't impartial in making that final decision. And then so that can lead to lawsuits as well. So there's a lot of reasons. It's not just like, oh, we want to not let you talk to your constituents. There's a reason why there's so much policy and regulation around boards, is because they are legal entities of the state. And so we have to follow policy on these things. And if you're not familiar with it, I recommend that you get familiar with specifically your B policies, because those are board policies and what governs you and your actions. And then the K policies are interesting because it talks a lot about concerns and complaints, which is what most board members get when it comes to community contact. Any questions there? And I think it's good for the community to know as well what these protocols are. What my experience is that if people can't find it, if it's not easy for them to find where to form a complaint or where to file a complaint or what the process is, they go straight to the top, right? I want to talk to your manager. Like, that's what they go straight to the top. And so it behooves, to use one of my mom's words, it behooves us as board members to make these policies and make the forms and make, easily accessible to our community. It should be 1 or 2 clicks away on your webpage of, do you have concerns or questions? This, and then I think, I forgot which district I saw, but it said concerns and questions. When you clicked on it, it listed, do you have concerns about personnel? Do you have concerns about facilities? Do you have concerns about curriculum? And each of those was a hyperlink to the policy and the form and the person that they could contact in terms of questions for that. If that was easily accessible to our community, I bet they would be less apt to go straight to the board, right? Or at the very least, they would be less upset with the board when the board says, hey, I need you to follow policy, because it's not some big mystery of what that policy is. So communication is important going out as well, right? We need to make sure that we're communicating with our community, and so that they know the rules that we're playing by, because the assumption is that we control all, right? They don't know that our only employee is the superintendent. They think that we have control over everybody, and we don't. And so we also don't want to give them this false narrative that we somehow can fix all their problems, because we're 1 of 5. We only have power when we're in a full meeting. And the only power we have is 1/5, right? We have a vote and we have to get a majority to go through. So we don't want our community to think that we somehow have influence that we don't. So documenting these processes, a lot of times people have unspoken, policies and practices. It's just the way things are done. And when new people come on board, they just get to know it, right? They learn it by practice. They maybe make a few mistakes along the way, and eventually they learn it too. And that's not a great way for building trust or mutual understanding, right? Because it's like telephone. If the rule is this, and you're learning about the rule by observing this person, then it may be slightly different, right? Than what originally it was supposed to be. And so it's really important that we document these, because then it's easy to go back to. You all have a really well working board, a good functioning board, it sounds like, and that's why it's such a great time to do this now, because when things get tough, or when a new person comes on, or if there's any kind of controversy or drama in the future, being able to pull these up and say, no, these are the things that we agreed to, unanimously. And so we need to go forward with that. And it's much easier to hold yourselves and others accountable when you have these things documented, instead of just like, well, this is always the way we've done it. And so that's what we're trying to do today, is to make sure we're all on the same page, and that then we document it. Because once you have documented this once, it makes it a lot easier to review it when you get new members and make adjustments as needed. Okay. Did you all get an email of the communication protocols packet? Okay, great. So we're gonna start looking at that now. I know I don't have everything in here because we did talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities, I think, last time. But if you go through the packet, you can see first, we talked about our objectives already. And the first page says our session ground rules. We're gonna participate as much as possible. Make sure that you're advocating and expressing your own interest and desires. So, you know, if you have a concern or you're not okay with something, let's talk about it. No judgment of others' beliefs or concerns. Voice concerns as we go and be honest with yourself and others. And let's not have any sidebars. The chat, I don't think you guys have access. Well, we do have a Zoom chat. That Zoom chat is for communication with me, but not between board members. So please make sure that that is used only if you have a question for me, or if I say, hey, put your response in the chat. And then in terms of my role, I'm just going to make sure that everybody gets a fair chance, kind of like the board president in the board meeting, to share their perspective. I'm going to make sure that we keep our discussion on track and within time constraints. There's a lot to get through. This training does tend to take 3 to 4 hours. And that's, you know, if there's not a lot of drama. So we're going to try to get through as much as possible. And so I may say, you know, okay, I'm going to take a couple notes here and then we're going to move forward, because then I'll give it back to Dr. Foley to follow up before they draft something for the meeting where you formally approve it. Because again, remember, today's just about discussion and kind of coming to some consensus. And where there's not consensus, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Foley to try to create something that would bring better consensus. And then at the end of the day, it goes to the board for a vote. So there may be some things that not everybody is on board with, but that as a whole is what is agreed to. And then that's it for that. So the second page on here is just how does our board rate? This is a little quiz for yourself. It asks about your board. Is your board slow to define the vision, mission, unprepared for board meetings? So I just want to go through that. If you could, I'm going to give you a couple minutes. And then I'm going to ask you for a strength that you really appreciate in terms of what your board is doing, and then an opportunity that you'd really like to see us address today. And just real quick for the administrators, I know this says, how does our board rate? This is for you too. The board's going to take this, but it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective as well in terms of how you feel with regards to the board actions. And it does say answer yes or no. If you want to put a sometimes on there, I know some people don't like those hard binaries. If you want to put a sometimes on there, that's okay too.
And Nikki, I know this one's going to be a little more difficult because this particular board's only had one meeting. And
Right.
so our newer board meetings or our newer board members can try and answer based on what they believe they observed or they thought, you know, in the past. And I know when I was going through some of it, it was like, but our board's changed. So I know how I would answer that 3 months ago, but
Well, I think it's still important to recognize that. So when I give you the opportunity to share a couple things, you can put the caveat of this was something I was worried about before, and I would like to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. Because yeah, some of it might not be happening now. Doesn't mean it won't be happening 6 months from now. Hopefully not, if it's a negative thing. If it's a positive thing, hopefully it can continue to happen 6 months from now.
Well, I think too, we put some protocols and processes in place starting about September that have also been, you know, new for the old board and that we continued through too. So it'll be interesting to get feedback on those as well.
Yeah. So let me go through, I'm going to again go through and ask you for at least one strength and then one opportunity that you see as a board that you could be working on. If you want to give me more than one opportunity, there's a couple things that you want to work on, then you need to give me the equal amount of strengths. So we're going to keep this balanced, but I'm going to start with just asking for one, and just to make sure that we have time for everybody to share, I would like you to just stick with the one for now. Let me go to Christina. You're the first person that I see, so I'm going to go ahead and let you go first.
Well, thank you. All right, I think looking here, our board was not slow to define a vision, a mission, and goals for our district. We were very passionate and focused in everything on that. So I think that's been a plus. We've done a lot to change where we were. So I'm excited with the new board members to kind of come on, and we're making that a ever working document. So I think where we need some improvement is negatively impacting the district by engaging in gossip and innuendo. I think we have had an issue with that. And so I think that is an area of improvement.
Great, thank you. Doctor, I'm going to do all the board members first, and then I'll go through and see if there's anything from administration. Michelle?
Just going off what Christina said, I don't have a lot of information just through the one meeting, but what I have noticed and experienced for a positive is just how everyone is prepared. Information is there and given out, and it seems very well organized. As far as working on anything, I had, IDKs next to a couple because I just didn't know. I didn't really come up with anything at this point in time that I feel like needs to be worked on, but it is something that I'll use this list to kind of use to gauge. So I appreciate you providing this.
Okay, great. Thank you. Tiffany?
Yeah, I, like Michelle, have a lot of question marks next to a couple of them. But I do feel like just from the one meeting that everyone there was prepared for the meeting. We are aware of the importance of professional development for teachers, and the communication has been great so far. So I don't have a lot of negative, a lot to report after one meeting yet. Like I said, I have a couple question marks. And
What's one of your question marks?
Uninformed about initiatives or programs being implemented to improve student achievement. I just don't have enough information. I like the information that I've received so far than I do, but I don't have enough backstory to know if that's continuous.
Okay, no, that's good to know. Michelle, going back to you, was there a question mark in particular of interest to you that you'd like to know sooner than later?
One of, I guess one I could put was unaware of the importance of professional development for teachers. I wasn't certain of that one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And also I had Tiffany's marked as well with a question mark. So that's 2 of us for that one.
One thing too, I think as far as the chain of command goes, I think that has been great so far. And I talked to Dr. Foley and also Amy regarding just making sure that follow the chain of command properly. Sorry.
Okay, Amy? If you're speaking, you're on mute still. I wasn't sure. I know you were having issues.
I'm having so many technical issues this morning because I'm trying to watch everything just on my phone, the packet, the information, everything.
Oh,
So
goodness.
I'm trying to keep up here. The one I have to kind of go back.
Oh, Amy, we lost you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. But if I go back to the screen that I want to see, then you lose me.
Possibly.
Oh dear.
No, what happened?
You can't put that packet up on the screen for us, right? Because I can't see both at the same time.
Okay,
But
let me.
the one thing,
I can go next, Amy, if you want, and you can write your stuff down and then we can come back to you.
no, it's I want to see the questions and talk to you all at the same time. That's my issue right now. But the one I thought was, hold on, I'll be right back. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think the one that I personally struggled with a little bit previously, which was kind of the day-to-day management. I was concerned about how things were handled at school sites and issues, complaints, and things like that. It is changed dramatically under Dr. Foley, and I don't feel that we all need to kind of know as much as we used to know, if that makes sense. So I hope that makes sense. Let me see if I can get back to my Zoom here.
I think I put up this, I don't know.
Oh, thank you. There, yes. Oh, thank you, Nikki. Now I can do both at the same time. Sorry. My iPad is slowly charging. We're at 10%, so maybe it will live again. I'm not sure. I thought that was something that we definitely in the past would be constantly bringing things, but I think it's much better now. I think the importance of professional development, that's been one of our initiatives. It's one of Dr. Foley's goals as well, is just making sure that we are providing that for teachers and that it's quality.
So that's your one positive thing? Because we're doing one positive and one negative. Okay. So your one positive is that we are focusing on professional development for teachers.
I think it is a focus, definitely. Is it
one
great yet? Probably not, but it's a focus and it's an importance. And then the negative would be just micromanaging, I think,
we don't do that anymore.
better, but yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. Jill.
So like Amy, I think we do a great job with professional development. We're putting that on the forefront with our middle schools. Last year, we made the initiative to do high school, and this year middle schools, and a couple of years ago, the elementary. So I would say that's our strength. And we are working hard to strengthen the professional development, not just provide time. And then the one that I thought that we could work on, and it probably is more like 3 months ago, Nikki, I don't know, obviously, what this board will do, and I don't see it coming as much from this board, was routinely ambushing the administration with surprise questions and concerns. And that's probably more at board meetings, because I feel like ambushing would be a board meeting. Is that how that question's supposed to be taken?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. So that's where I kind of went with, because I do think sometimes some members, and I could be one of them, would ambush with questions that came up during the time, and they didn't have time to even research and know how to answer the question.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I mean, and that's
hard, like a hard line, because sometimes a question comes up during a meeting that pops into your mind and you want to ask it, and you do, but they don't have time to research it and know the answer because they don't know everything. So that's the one I would say I need to work on as well.
Yeah,
So.
and we'll talk about agenda protocols in terms of the meeting, like what things should happen before, during, and after the meeting, which I think will help with that.
Okay, thank you.
Did I get all the board members? Okay. So that's just a good, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here. I just wanted to kind of, get there. Is there anything burning from the administration that they want to add?
I appreciated the reflection the board members had, because I would agree with the things that they identified as positive. I think one of the things too, and I know you're going to get into the protocols, but I think one of the things that really helped was also when we started working on that, we put our packet out. If we have questions, you get it to us so that we can respond in writing to everybody, has helped. And plus we're working on our communication weekly with putting information, background information on things that will be coming to the board. So more questions, so that they have time to also understand and see and ask questions. I think it's been a way that we've proactively put in place to make sure that we get the information that they need and that we are ready to answer questions.
Great. Do you all see the board superintendent communication now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to make sure I got through the different slides correctly. All right. So when I went through this, I sent it to Dr. Foley ahead of time. For the board members, there are a couple things in the packet. I'm not going to go through today right now, but effective school boards, that's some of the 8 characteristics of effective school boards. These are things that if boards do, they tend to see better outcomes for students. Then there's a quick visual of that board authority and superintendent authority and where those kind of work together. Page 5 also has some examples of that. But we're going to skip to page 6 in the workbook. And we're going to start talking about these protocols. So right now, what I understand is that boards are receiving communication from the superintendent every week, and that regular communication includes weekly status reports. Board packets come monthly along with the supporting documentation. And then quarterly, you'll go through things like financials, HR, special education. So department reports will rotate on a quarterly basis, which means you might be getting a department report every month, but that over the course of a year, you may only hear from a department quarterly. You can see there that it says our board expects to, so those first 2 got filled in by the superintendent, but then have access to the same information. One member's request for additional information results in all members receiving and having the same information. I believe you said that that's something that now happens with Dr. Foley, that if there's a piece of information, then that gets shared with everyone. And that would go with questions too. So Dr. Foley, I'm not sure if you do this, but if a board member has a question or requests additional information, that you then share whatever you gave to that board member with everyone else, regardless if they asked.
Here's the deal, and if it's connected to a board agenda item. So let's say we have an agenda, we post the agenda, and there's a question about it. So an individual board member may ask a question about anything on the agenda. What we do is we get additional information and put it in a write-up that goes to everybody, so everyone can see the questions and additional information pertaining to that board agenda. so that it's kind of like our protocol. We set the agenda, we prepare the packet, we get the questions, we put it back in writing so everyone has the same information. Now, if a board member communicates with me with a specific concern on their own kid or an issue, those things that are not pertaining to any agenda item on the board, that would not necessarily go to the entire board, but anything that is connected to an agenda item would be back in writing, so that everyone had the same background information.
Okay.
Plus, everyone will have the status report every week, which sometimes includes, on coming consent that which is, gives additional information. We're implementing our technology plan that we adopted that obviously they've already approved, but you'll see in consent, we're getting ready to buy the computers for this school for this purpose. So that way they've gotten a little background. They then get the packet with the items. If there's questions, we answer it and everyone gets the same information.
Okay, great.
And then the quarterly one, though, would be like, we've started implementing like quarterly updates that are part of our meeting that are, we've spent this much in ESI. We just had it at our last meeting. It was our time for our quarterly updates so that they could get monitored progress on some of the things that they approved, so that we know where we're at.
Okay. Then going to the shared agreements, and I'm not asking for feedback just yet. I just want to read through these. What we have listed here, and this was part of our standard language, so this is new to the district. It may be something that you're doing, but it's not something that I got from the district. These are shared agreements that we recommend. The superintendent and board members will treat each other and staff with respect. Superintendent will acknowledge receipt of feedback shared by a board member and confirm issues will be addressed. So that goes back to if you got relevant feedback and that from one member that you felt like the rest of the board should know, that goes out to them. And then confirm that issues are going to be addressed. So we'll talk a little bit more about that with email communication, but sometimes we get concerns from the community via email and we're not sure if we're all supposed to respond, who's supposed to respond. So we're going to talk about who's going to respond to that. But the idea being that eventually whoever responds, the board will get notification that something happened with it. Because I know as a board member for a long time, I didn't know if I was supposed to respond and I wasn't sure and I didn't want to leave them hanging. So now what we do is our board president will CC us all on his response. We can't, of course, respond anything else beyond that, but it's mostly just for us to know that he saw the email too and responded to it. Some other people will, the board president will copy the superintendent, and then the superintendent will share that, yes, it has been responded to, just to avoid any potential open meeting law with the board president replying to everybody on a topic. Superintendent will respect and acknowledge the perspective of board members as representatives of their community, and a shared agreement support, not surprises. That goes both ways. So the board doesn't want to learn from a staff member or from the news something that has happened in the district. And district staff don't want to hear about an allegation or a kind of a got you question the day of. They want to have the opportunity to know where that's coming from so that they can prepare. So up until this point, is there anything that anybody takes issue with? Or is there anything on that weekly, monthly, quarterly communications that board would like to see that they're not seeing? Is there some piece of information that you would like to see that you aren't currently seeing, or something that you would like to see more frequently than what is currently being offered?
I like the idea, Nikki, of you saying some sort of communication when we get an email, because I do feel like our community's writing these emails to us. Obviously, you're a board member right now. You understand the emails that we're getting. And I want them to know that, like, I've at least read the email, and I feel bad if I don't respond. So I like that you talked about that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody think that they need to get something more or more frequently? Okay.
I want to stress that one of the things too, the point about Well, like, if there's a situation that's come up and what we've learned about it or addressed, that's another way we're using the status report too, is that if there was a situation that came up, the status report's kind of a combination of progress we're making, upcoming agenda items, but a unique situations that came up that week that we looked at, a board member might have brought to our attention. We've sort of explained the situation and where we are in that. So again, that's where those status reports are kind of a compilation of all of those things. And what if there is something that's urgent, or a communication that's going to go out to employees, we send it to, the board members may get a forwarded email saying, FYI, here is communication that's going to employees, in addition to and daily they're going to get text about any communication that may go out at schools with protocols. That's a new thing too with COVID, so that you're going to get notification of what's going out in addition to that summary report. So that'll be this. It's a lot of information coming.
So let's talk about that, because you don't have this on here, and we want to make sure that if it's something that you're doing or something that the board should expect, that it's on here. So let's move to emergency communications, because it seems like the daily texts about what's going out to families isn't something that you would normally do, but you're doing during COVID, right? So let's move to emergency communications. It seems like people are happy with, in terms of what they're getting on the weekly, monthly, quarterly. And then that's working so far. So we're going to move to the second part of page 6 that talks about emergency communications. And it says, our board will be notified by Dr. Foley as soon as possible for the following: a school emergency or lockdown, which means a lockdown or a fire, and a student emergency, which is an arrest, injury, or death. So say a child's broke their leg on a piece of equipment and is going to the hospital. That'd be something that board members would want to know ASAP. Of course, lockdowns or fire drills, anytime emergency services are called out, that would be something that would be an emergency. Staff emergency, again, like if there's an arrest, an injury, or a death. Just because those are things that may or may not come to be in the news, especially in a smaller area, smaller town. There's things that happen in our district, but nobody cares because we're in Phoenix and there's a million things happening on any news cycle. So, but I know that in some of our smaller communities, anything that happens at any of their schools is the top news, for that area. So making sure that if it's going to go to the news, that the board knows about it as soon as possible. And let's identify what as soon as possible is, because I think that's where some board members have some confusion, because there is the reality that if there is a true emergency, the superintendent may be unavailable, right? They're dealing with the emergency. And so I like that you say knows that Darlene is the person to contact when the superintendent cannot be reached during an emergency. And that's pretty typical. What I'll see is that, in these agreements, Dr. Foley will, or, whoever the first emergency person is, the superintendent will definitely, you'll hear from them within 24 hours, but you may hear from the board president or the board secretary, as soon as she finds out, right? So Dr. Foley, instead of reaching out to every board member, will let Darlene know what's going on, and then Darlene will reach out to the board members, because it's easier for Dr. Foley in an emergency to just respond to one person than respond to several, if that makes sense. So what I have here is that in an emergency, Dr. Foley or Darlene will contact as soon as possible, and that the board should reach out to Darlene if there's questions or concerns during an emergency. And what that means is that if you know that there's a lockdown and you want to know more information or what the latest is, you wouldn't be blowing up Dr. Foley's phone. You would reach out to Darlene, because again, we can't have the person that's managing the crisis trying to field emails, because she's probably getting texts from emergency personnel, teachers on site, everybody else that she's trying to manage. So in an emergency, once you've been made aware of an emergency, if you have questions or want status updates, the protocol that it says here is to reach out to Darlene, and she'll be the one to push out updates to the board as she gets them. Any concerns or questions in that section, those first two under our board expects in terms of emergency communication?
I have a question, Nikki. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. When a student has like a seizure, which happens quite often at a particular school, and when emergency services are called, that's something that we should know or not know. Always kind of wondered about like those kind of things. A teacher passes out, that kind of stuff. Is that something that the board should get a text on, or no?
It depends. Like if you know that there's somebody that is medically fragile or whatever, has diabetes or, you know, something where they have that, I don't know if you need, and we have, so for example, in our district, we have 32 schools. If somebody twists an ankle or something on a playground, we don't necessarily hear about it. But if I would say that if fire trucks or somebody arrives, that'd be something that you'd want to know, because the community is going to see, other parents or their kids are going to hear about a fire truck or an ambulance coming to the district. So that might be something that you do want to know about. But if it's something where they had a seizure, but the nurse at the school knows how to deal with that and they did, you know, go about their day, I don't think you need to know about everything like that. Mm-hmm. I think the superintendent will let you know if it becomes an issue. But if you know, got every injury that happened on campus, every time a teacher bumped their head, I mean, that wouldn't, that'd be a lot. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yes, I think it's when you see like a fire truck at a school, it does raise some, you know, concerns in the neighborhood. But again, there's also those students that are a continuous maybe issue medically that negates that, but not necessarily the board needs to know.
Yeah. And I would think that, you know, if that became enough of an issue that something from the principal would come out, we know that, you know, we have emergency personnel has been out several times. We have a student with you know, there's nothing going on, right? Because people, you know, the neighbors might start to think that there's something terrible going on, or parents, you know, hearing about that. So I'm sure that's a case-by-case basis. If that's something that happens frequently enough, that you would communicate to the community. But let's talk a little bit about what constitutes an emergency. Is there anything not listed here that you would think constitutes an emergency? So, for example, COVID is not necessarily an emergency. An emergency is something that was either unexpected or came up rather quickly. Something like COVID is it's not on our communication protocols because it's kind of like an ongoing crisis. But let's talk a little bit about your COVID protocols right now, unless there's something that people want to add to the emergency one.
Nikki? Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as board members, and like you were saying, we're a small community. And in the way of technology, parents are probably going to know of an emergency, and it's going to be on Facebook, probably even before our superintendent's office has been fully notified.
True.
Just with the way technology is and everything else. So as board members, we need to remember that it can be out on social media within seconds. And so it's not a lack of our superintendent not getting that information out to us. And, you know, they want to make sure they have all the information before they're communicating with the board. They can send out obviously a little blurb, hey, something going on at this school, but we just have to remember that, because we, like you said, we are a small community and it's going to be on social media within seconds. So we just have to remember that.
where we had a threat was made against a school, and a student made a post on Facebook making a threat and then took it down, but several friends had seen it and shared it out, and so the school was getting calls from parents, and the school didn't even know that there was a threat against the school. So yeah, that those types of things do happen, but it's important that we if you hear about it, that you bring it to administration's attention and then let them do some investigating. It may be the first time they're hearing about it, or they may say, yes, we just heard about it. I'm going to have Darlene send a text to all board members that we're investigating, and we'll get them an update soon. Because I still think that Dr. Foley, best case scenario, if you know that the information's out there, even if you don't have any details, acknowledge, letting them know that you're aware of it, will at least let them know that something's happening.
Yep, because I really appreciate Christina's points, because literally it's happening instantaneously, and we are a small knit community. I think those are great points, and easily we're aware of it and provide an update as soon as we can get the clarification. Sometimes too, we're looking at our board members are people that our community will go to what's going on. And so when we're aware of something, we may even give information. I'm thinking of an example this summer. We had a bus that had been hit over by our railroad tracks here, and it was a bus from the Kyrene district, but we knew that perhaps the governing board members were going to get communication about what about the bus, so we gave an update saying there has been an accident, everything is okay, this is not one of our buses, but knowing that this would be something that would come up or that they'd be asked about, which is one of the reasons why part of our COVID protocols are every day we will send the governing board a text, and we will tell them how many cases have been confirmed at each school. We do that so that we're getting ready to send communication to parents at that school. And sometimes we want our board members to know who they may get questions from, which schools had cases, and communication is going out to. We do the same thing. Sometimes they'll get a text that says, we have to quarantine a team at this school for this, and we're going to start making calls, so that they're aware that we're going to start calling these members of the community in case they get asked, oh, what about that? What's going on at Higley High? What's going on at Coronado? They're aware that the communication went out.
Okay. Anything else with regards to your COVID protocols? I know the daily texts, but
we adopted a mitigation strategy, and where we're using our dashboard every day. And so again, that also allows them to see the numbers. Obviously, we're monitoring it day by day. Some come on, some come off. But if there was if we had a site that was sustaining numbers, they would be communicated with, that we would be making a call to change the learning model at that school as soon as we made that determination by a Thursday. But fortunately, we have not had that happen. But that would be what we would do in the event that there was a situation like that.
Okay. So board members, any questions or feedback with regards to this that we've discussed so far? Okay.
Just a real quick question. Dr. Foley, are we still using the reunification plan that Mrs. Corey developed in case of an evacuation on a campus?
One of the things that we need to take a look at those plans. One of the things that happened was we were given permission to postpone bus evacuation drills and those kind of things, because here we were trying to mitigate strategies to not bring groups together in small quarters. They were slowed down. So we have not done or plan to do a reunification drill like that at this time. I think we will revisit that. That's one of those things for COVID that have been put on hiatus. So there are some plans there, but I do believe they're going to be updated here by site as part of processes and systems, but they are postponed and are not a requirement at this moment because of conflicts with, our mitigation strategies.
Yeah, because that's one of the next things that are on here on the workshop is, do you understand as board members what your emergency management plans are?
Dr. Foley, I was going to mention right here that it might be good to have, since they're now allowing us to go into executive session about this, it might be good to, at some point in the future, put that on our agenda. And this might be for Christina or Mrs. Reese as well, that putting it on our agenda so we can learn more about that in an executive session, especially for the 2 new board members.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just be sure that the part in executive session is your safety plan in terms of active shooter or risk on campus. It's not what to do when there's an earthquake or what to do when there's a fire. Those are not the ones that would be in executive session. But yeah, so all board members should be aware of their emergency management plans. You don't need to memorize them. You just need to know what they are and where to access them. And then under what circumstances would an emergency board meeting be called? So you all would definitely have to do some discussion around that. So I would imagine that emergency board meetings are usually when there's a large public concern, which I'm sure many of us had emergency board meetings when COVID first hit.
Mm-hmm.
A true emergency is you can't even notice it. You just notice it as soon as possible. And that might be something where you got a credible threat, or there is some kind of situation at a school where you need to have a meeting right now about what to do about it. It oftentimes doesn't have to be less than 24 hours. You can still have a quote unquote emergency meeting, which is just a meeting that's not your regular meeting. So it could be like, all right, we know that this is an issue and we don't want to wait 2 weeks or 3 weeks to have it. So we're going to host this meeting in the next couple of days.
I would like more information on student and staff protests and walkout, what the plan of action for that is for handling those.
Okay. So I'm going to put that in here, Dr. Foley, because again, this is a plan of just communication. So really, this is a big homework assignment for Dr. Foley and her team, because what we're going to do is we're going to take a lot of these notes. She's going to come up with a whole communication plan for Higley. And I would expect that that plan would be made, available to the public. If here's our communication protocols for these various different pieces. You may not, have all of it up on there, like the agenda agreements and all that stuff might be more of an internal document that you attach to your B policies, but for the most part, people should know what the protocols are. Okay, so we're going to move to the next page, page 7. Just going through some of these slides we talked about, board members were, okay. So here's some shared agreements. The superintendent and board members will be respectful towards all staff. I think we went through that. Direction is only given at a board meeting when the majority of the board votes to give direction. This is really important. When emergencies happen, board members may have a lot of opinions or things that they think should be done, but remembering that the board is the boss, not individual board members. And so if any direction is going to be given to the superintendent to do something, it needs to happen through a majority of the board. So what that means is if there's a situation where you strongly feel like this is something that needs to be addressed, you may ask your board president or superintendent to host an emergency meeting to have the discussion. Or you may ask for a future agenda item to discuss what the process is going to be for X, Y, or Z. But you definitely want to make sure that communication is board driven and not individuals, because what we don't need is to have 5 different communication plans. That Dr. Foley is doing this for this board member, that for that board member, because that's not very effective. Board members will remain impartial and share both positive and negative feedback about the district with the superintendent. Again, you're sharing the feedback that you received, but if you remember your policy, you have to follow policy in terms of complaints. And one of the things that it says is you can't give anonymous complaints. The board will not look at or consider anonymous complaints, which means that you should not be coming to Dr. Foley and saying, well, I heard from a parent that blah, blah, blah. If that parent can't be identified and followed up with, then that's not something that should be coming before the board. That's a matter of policy. And a lot of times that's what happens is the teacher or a staff member or a parent will come to a board member to get in their ear, tell them something, and then want something to be done about it, but don't want to be identified. You know, I know that there's sometimes some concern around, you know, I don't want to get in trouble, but if you're going to have communication and you're going to set up these protocols, that's part of it. And really by policy, you're not supposed to take anonymous feedback. So it's really important that you refer people to the chain of command so that they're not coming to you with this information. And it's really important to try to stay as impartial as possible, which is why you want to, you know, sometimes what I will do is I'll warn them ahead of time when somebody calls me or they want to talk. Can I talk to you about something? I kind of just say, is it about something that's happening in the schools? And if they say yes, I say, okay, well, just so that you know, I'm only one of 5. I can't take any anonymous complaints. So whatever you tell me, if you want me to do something with it, I'm going to have to use your name. And I do that so that they know up front, because I'm not going to share something with the superintendent. And if they just want to tell me, I let them know, if you continue to tell me, I will tell the superintendent, because what I also don't want is to have this information that the rest of the board doesn't have. So it's really important as board members that you set up those boundaries and that you let people know up front what they can and cannot expect from you. So just letting them know, I don't have control over that. I'm one of 5, and we only have one employee, that's a superintendent. So like if you have a problem with your teacher or whatever, there's nothing that I can do for you at this level. And if I get involved now, I may not be able to help you in the future. And that kind of tells people that you care, but that you need to stay impartial so that should their matter come before you, that you can be somebody on the decision-making panel. And I've found for the most part that people have been okay with that. I think the hardest ones were my friends, that if we used to complain about things together or we used to have, you know, chats about stuff, to now not be able to do that is difficult. Because I had a couple of my son's friends work for the district. And so when I wasn't a board member, they could complain about their job and stuff. And when they were, it was a little bit harder for me to be like, what do you want me to do with this information? So I think coming up with a script of something kind of similar to what I said has helped a lot of people, both in email and in person. And what I have is a little bit of I call it the thank, acknowledge, refer. Thank, acknowledge, refer. Thank you for feeling comfortable enough to come to me with your concern. I understand that you're saying that you're upset about X, Y, or Z. Let me refer you to the superintendent, or I'll refer you back to your principal as a first start for that matter. Do you have their contact information? Here you go. Here's their email address. Or you can reach out to the school. It may seem like it's a form letter, but it's the best thing to be consistent and equitable with your community members. It's the best thing to make sure that you don't bias yourself should something come ahead of you. And it gives them it gets them in the habit of what they're supposed to be doing, so that they know how to handle their issues in the future. Because if you're consistent with that, people will stop coming to you to get kind of that special treatment, right? They'll come to you for advice. They'll understand that you're going to give them to the right person. And that's a good place to be. If they know that you're going to get them to the right person, that's a good place to be. If they're coming to you thinking that they're going to jump the line and get straight to the ear of the superintendent and get special, attention to their issue, that's not a good place to be. And if 4 of you are following the protocol and 1 of you are not, you're going to have that one person get very busy because everybody's going to know where the quote unquote weak link is, and they're going to go to them with all of their issues. And you don't want to be the weak link because it's very tiresome because then people come and they bother you a lot. And that's not to say we don't want to hear from our constituents, but there's ways to build appropriate things. There's surveys that could be made, there's town halls, there's task force, there's all kinds of ways that we can get more equitable feedback and more representative feedback from our communities that isn't responding to anybody that emails to us. Okay, so board members will reserve judgment and refrain from investigating concerns. Instead of, they're going to defer to the chain of command, and again, support, not surprises. So if somebody does come to you, letting the superintendent know, hey, this person came to me, I sent them to their principal, just to give them a heads up. Any questions there? In terms of what to expect, it says questions regarding district operations or concerns or feedback given should be sent to Dr. Foley. That's what's in your protocol here. So if you're not sure who the chain of command is, you can refer directly to Dr. Foley, and Dr. Foley will probably say, have you talked to your teacher yet? Have you talked to the principal yet? And so she'll refer them if you're not exactly sure. But if they come to you and say, well, I have a problem with my child's teacher, the first thing that you can say is, did you talk to the teacher? If they say, well, yeah, but did you do it in writing? Okay, no. Well, I suggest you email the teacher and see if you can work it out. And if not, you can email the principal and then send them on their way. And you can let them know if you've done those things and you still haven't heard anything, let me know and I'll send you to the next person in the chain. All right. So since we're kind of already on, the next section is really about the board agenda and agreements there, but I want to go, since we're already kind of talking about it, I want to skip over to page 9 in the communications workbook, because we're kind of on that lane, and I want to finish that one up before we take a break. Under board and community communications, board members will serve as ambassadors for their district and emphasizing the positive aspects of the district. Board members are cheerleaders. It doesn't mean that you turn a blind eye to negative things, but it's really important that you balance that and that you are focusing on all the achievements that you are making. Because it's really easy for us to focus on the negative. And most of the time, we only really talk about things when bad things are happening. So it takes special effort to ensure that we as board members are modeling for our community that we can talk about both our successes and the things that we need to improve on. If we as a board are constantly only talking about things that are going wrong, we're going to tell our community that there's a lot more bad than there are good. And that is not the message that we want to portray. But our natural thing is to want to fix the things that are wrong. And as humans, we often fail to celebrate, right? We're more often to correct our kids on the things that they're doing wrong than to stop them and thank them for doing the things that they're doing right. And so we need to kind of mentally get ourselves into that space, because it's, for many of us, it's not the default. The default is to not focus on the positive, is to focus on the things that still need work. And when we don't, and that's why I started this with, what are the things that we're doing well? And what do you want to change? And trying to balance that so that we don't get too on one side or the other. Mm-hmm. If board members and community meetings, the superintendent's office should be notified in order of events to be properly noticed if you're going to attend community meetings. So this is about, if you agree to it, it's about letting the board, letting the administration know when they plan to go to events. So one thing that my board secretary will do is say, hey, there's this training, or hey, there's a play at such and such school. Do you plan to attend? Because then what she will do is she will put what they call a soft notice. Soft notices are not required by law, but it is something that people do in order for perception, right? Especially in smaller towns. To say, hey, we know that 3 board members are going to be at this particular event, but they will not be discussing board business. Because remember, in order to have a meeting, you have to have a quorum and you have to be talking about board business. So I would recommend board members, if possible, to not even sit together at said event, kind of spread yourself out. If it's a graduation ceremony or something like that, there's going to be a soft notice if more than 3 of you are there. But of course you'd be on the stage and hopefully not talking about board business, but that's what those soft postings are. So it's important to let them know. And that may be something that's nothing to do with the district. So I'll give you an example. I worked with a community that a majority of the board members were also part of a town council, either on the council or worked for, the city that was part of those meetings. And so they had to start putting soft posting like, yes, we know our board members will all be at this city meeting or town meeting, but no board business is being discussed. And then the third one on here, and these are all things, again, you can take or you can leave. So I'm going to ask you how you feel about them in just a moment. Complaints received from staff in the community will be directed towards the chain of command as in your policies KE and KEB. The board recognizes that it is the last stop in the complaint process. Individual board members have no authority to solve problems, and individual board members can confirm with the superintendent that complaints are addressed. And that is to say that if they hear a complaint, it's perfectly acceptable for a board member to say, Dr. Full, did you ever reach out to that person? Or what was the resolution for this person? Sometimes they won't be able to tell you, especially if it's about their specific student or something like that. But they can definitely say, yes, we had a phone call with that parent, or yes, we had a meeting with that teacher and that parent. Any questions or objections to anything that we just read under that board and community communication? Okay, I'm going to put there again that thank, acknowledge, refer. I'm going to put that note in here, and I just really encourage all of you to come up with your elevator speech. Make it make sense to you, make it feel a little, in your words. But I promise you, if you have that on the ready on your emails and in your phone calls, it does save a lot, and you can still be responsive. And you can still listen to what people have to say, but you can do so in alignment with what your role is as a board member.
Nikki, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When during the height of COVID and reopening of schools or closing schools, we were receiving, too many emails for one. I would need a secretary as the board president. So is there some kind of, written rule that we don't have to communicate and respond to every single email that we get? We talked with our Udall Shumway, and unless there was a question in the email, if they were just emailing to rant, that's one thing. But if they had a question that I could actually answer or direct them to, I would respond. But I can guarantee it, there was hundreds of emails that was just, yelling at me I didn't respond to. Is that bad?
No.
What is the rule?
I would go with your lawyer's recommendation, but yeah, there's not a legal obligation to respond to email, right, as a board member. I would say best practice is yes, if they have a question or concern. What we've received is, like, as board members, something similar in that they share their personal concerns. Like, so they're not asking a question necessarily, but they're sharing their experience or the problems that they're having or the reason why something's not working for them, or vice versa, that they really hope that we continue to do what we're doing, and there's no real question in there. Our board president does have a form letter that says thank you. We do read all of our emails, even if we don't respond. If you have a specific question, please reach out to the administration. And yes, that's a little bit of a form, but when you're dealing with, sometimes hundreds of emails, that is a good way to go about doing that, is saying, and if you have a specific question, please reach out to the administrative offices. Other than that, we do read that. If you would like another one we sometimes do is, if you want to include comments, we recommend that you submit through public call. So whatever you're currently doing for a public call, for us, since we're not in person, we have a deadline of noon the day of our board meeting. And anybody that emails and says that they have to say that they want their comments read, but they can email and say, I have comments for the board, call to the public. Because if they just send us an email, we don't read every email into comments unless they specifically tell us that they wanted it to be part of call to the public.
But Nikki, part of that is because you're not in person, correct?
Correct.
Yep. Because when we were this summer, when we weren't having the ability for people to come in person, we had a similar protocol. But now that we are in person, people need to come to the meeting to have it on the record. I mean, of course, they could email at any time, but we are not having email questions read or comments read.
Okay. So that can be your protocol as long as you're consistent with that. I would say it would be okay. I mean, one of the things we just did in Bolts is some of the things that are going to stick are people are going to still want virtual meetings, even though people can go back to in person. Some people are still going to want virtual meetings. So that's something that you all have to discuss as a board, that if that's going to be the case, then how are you going to allow for a call to the public for both groups of people so that it's fair, right? So I would just say that if,
well, and I could put that in as part of our protocol for preparation for meetings would be public comment. If the meetings are not available for participation from audience, public comment will receive this way. If they are, public comment is in person only. Could I put that as a protocol or in our communication?
If that's the way that you guys want to do it, as long as it's consistent. But one of the tips that for those in-person protocols, so that we were talking about in Bolts is if you're going to continue, so for example, we haven't really discussed this in my district, but if we went back to in-person, we still plan to stream our meetings. And so we will have to decide, are we going to let people that are not physically in the building participate? And if we are, because say I found that now that meetings are online, we see a lot more participation and people that may not have been able to come to the meeting because they have to get dinner ready and everything else can come to a virtual meeting. So if we're going to allow them to participate in our meeting virtually, we should allow them to participate fully. And so if we give them protocols on what they can submit, call to the public, and we allow that in our district, we can still put the same time, manner, and restrictions that we would if they were in person. Meaning that if in person, it is, you limit it to 2 minutes and they can't use vulgarity and they can't use, et cetera. Apply the same thing to the written comment, meaning that you'll only read 2 minutes worth of it. If they write you a novel that's going to take you 10 minutes to read, you're not going to read it. You're only going to read 2 minutes of it. You're not going to read anything that has any vulgarity or anything like that. So you can come up with the same restrictions. But you can also say that we go back to full meetings and we're streaming only and you have to come for call to the public. I would just question whether or not you feel like that is an equitable way if you still have a good amount of people participating virtually.
I have a question for Curtis. Is he around?
Mm-hmm.
Curtis, about how many people, since we've been back in session, watch our meetings now? You can kind of see the count, right?
I don't know if he's got sound. Oh, there he goes. His in the chat, he said roughly between 20 to 50.
Is that live, Curtis? They're watching live. Okay.
Yes, his answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
So again, something to consider as you're writing up your protocols, and that would be something the board would have to make a decision on and give guidance.
But I think, Dr. Foley, of those 20 to 50, we probably know of maybe 1 or 2 that have stated their concern to not come to a meeting but want their statements read. Is that about correct?
Correct.
Well, and I think too that a lot of people are still very interested in what we're doing with COVID. And, you know, while we've remained in person and have not changed that since we've gone to in person, people are waiting and watching to see, are we going to? So, I mean, so I think that our virtual response right now still to our board meetings is probably still COVID driven. But it's certainly something we need to consider going forward if that's what we want to do. And the board's just going to have to make that decision with our new normal, because whether we have 2 people watching virtually or 102 people, we just have to figure out what we want to offer.
Yep.
The other thing I will mention is that the anonymity, when we do call to the public, people are supposed to identify themselves. And so I would do the same if you're getting an email from some doesn't have a name, doesn't, they're not identifying themselves, you wouldn't, and they want to be read into the public record, I would definitely respond and make sure that they know that if they want it to be read into the public record, it has to identify themselves. So basically all the same rules that apply in person would apply to anybody that would want to do the content, except for maybe the time limit, because if called to the public, you can just show up. Most people have the policy that you can just show up the night of the meeting and fill out a card that you want to speak. But for the online ones, it's reasonable that your administrative assistant would need some time to prepare the comments for the meeting. So having a deadline of when you're going to be accepting those would be okay. You just want to make sure that all of those protocols are very clearly stated along with your agenda on how they can do that.
Another maybe question or comment, but when we do the call to public, we always include that, complaints about personnel are processed through policy KE and KEB. We actually say that in our board meeting. And then usually, after somebody comments, the board isn't responding to that comment or that complaint, but as the direction of the board president usually will say to maybe our director of secondary or director of elementary, would you please follow up with this parent and this situation?
Yeah, that would be completely
That's kind of how we've been doing it.
That'd be completely appropriate, and you'd act the same way with any written comment. You wouldn't include, you wouldn't have to read parts that were, like I said, if they're making an accusation or something, that you would use the discretion. But if they want to say my teacher's terrible, you still have to read it, right? But then you could do the same thing you would do is, that person's not here to defend themselves. I will direct, our administrator to follow up with this person. So I'm going to put a little note on the communication protocols to identify calls to the public protocol for live or virtual. Site visits. So going up on page 9, site visits. Let me bring it up so that people can see. Oops. Okay. So it's really a great opportunity for board members to go out to as many of the schools as they can during a year to just check in, to see what's going on. But it's important that you follow some protocols around that, because sometimes board members may use that as their investigation time, where they start asking questions of staff and students and, trying to pop into classrooms to observe certain teachers. And that's not really what board members are supposed to be doing. They're not there to investigate or to kind of spy on any kind of operations. If they have concerns, they should make those available to the superintendent if they have concerns. So we want to talk a little bit about the protocols around site agreements. These are, again, things that we've written, but you all can create your protocols. This is just what we've written in terms of best practices. Board members are encouraged to attend as many school events as possible as a spectator, as long as time permits. You would probably want to mention in here protocols for events. Some board members want to be acknowledged at any event that they go to. Some don't want that. So if that's the case, there should be a protocol around how to let the event organizer know that that's the case, because they don't always know who their board members are, that you're present. And so I've seen people be like, well, they didn't announce me, and I kind of feel, out of sorts about it. If that's something that is commonplace for you, that you try to do, is acknowledge board members when they're in events, which I think is good because it shows that board members are part of their community and are participating. I would just come up with a protocol in terms of how a board member can alert the event organizer, or how they can alert the superintendent or the admin secretary to let the event organizer know that they may be present. And of course, let them know if you're not going to be present, because you'd hate for them to announce that you're there and you're not. So make sure that that is written down. Board members wishing to visit a school. It's important to remember that as board members, when you are not in a publicly noticed agenda or publicly noticed called to order meeting at the dais, you have no more authority than anybody else in your community. So when you're not at the dais in a meeting making votes, you really have no authority than anybody else in the community, which means that when you show up to a campus, you are going to be expected to follow the same protocols as anybody else. So if you wouldn't let somebody's, tia or mom or stepbrother come right in and take a tour of the campus, then you shouldn't expect to have that same access, if that makes sense. So a couple things, check with who, and this is, I'm going to put this up to Dr. Foley. Is it the superintendent, the board secretary, the principal, about the best time to visit? If you want to visit a school, you should make sure that it's a good time for the school. If they're, and this is when school is in public, but even I've seen some board members ask to join a Zoom just to kind of say hi and see how things are going. You don't want to just pop in. You want to make sure that when you're coming, it's not going to be a distraction to education. And so you want to make sure that they know you're coming and that it's at a time that's the least distracting to the education that's going on. You want to follow campus guidelines for visitors, which means that maybe you feel, especially sometimes in a smaller town, that everybody knows me. I had once, they're the only school in town and everybody knows them. You should still sign in, get your guest badge, stay with your escort. A lot of times we're not fingerprinted, which means that we can't be alone with students or left alone. So when we're on campus, we have to stay with our escort. We're not allowed to just roam the building. So again, making sure that when you are on campus, you're following the visitor guidelines for that campus. Respect the staff time and allow them to perform their duties, meaning you don't want to interrupt their instructions so you can ask them questions, or all of a sudden say, hey, I feel like reading a story to the kids. Stop everything you're doing and let me interact with the kids for 20 minutes. You want to make sure that you respect time. If that's something that you want to do, that'd be something you would coordinate with them ahead of time. Remember, you're not there to give direction. You have one employee and you're 1/5 of their boss. So you only have that person to give feedback to. You're not supposed to be giving direction to any staff or students. If you see staff or students are not following policy, or they're doing something that you think is questionable, you can let the principal know there, hey, I saw this. Or you can let the superintendent know. Most importantly, if you see an immediate safety concern, I would let the principal know. But if it's just, I saw some student behavior I didn't like, or I saw a teacher's behavior that I didn't like, I would take that to the superintendent, because we don't want to give directions to the principal, because again, they're not our employee. So if you see anything of a concern to you while you're on campus, go to the superintendent, unless it's an immediate safety concern, and then you can go to the principal. Do not accept gifts or any favors from any district employee other than nominal tokens. So they want to give you a picture that they drew or something that they made. my mom makes the best tamales. Here's, 6 tamales. I mean, something that it would be damaging to the relationship if you didn't take, but you certainly don't want to take gift cards or anything of that nature from anybody, staff or student, while in your duties. If you are friends with a teacher, you've been friends for 20 years, and that teacher wants to give, you guys have gift exchanged, use your best judgment, and what the intent is behind that and the cost of the gift. Just use your best judgment in that, because it has happened where people were friends and then they weren't friends, and then they, have some awkward situations. When visiting with teachers of their own children, this is really important for board members that have kids in the district. Board members will make it clear that they are acting as parents and not as board members. I can tell you from my experience, I use my personal Gmail account when I reach out to my kids' teachers. I don't use, I try to make sure I don't have my board name tag or anything that associates me with the board when I'm on campus. But they still know that you're a board member. So making sure that you are following your policies. I always make sure I go to the teacher first. I've been telling this story. I recently had an issue where I had a problem with my student's teacher, and I talked to the teacher. I thought we had it resolved. You didn't have it resolved. And so I had to go to the principal, and the principal resolved it for me. My superintendent probably still doesn't know. I mean, maybe, unless the principal told him, but I had at no point brought my issue to the superintendent. And I know at some point somebody said, if I have questions about my kid, talking to the superintendent, I would just ask, is that the person I need to talk to? If it was any other parent, would I tell them to talk to the superintendent, or would I tell them to start with the teacher? And it's important for you to follow those protocols too. Even if it's your student and you have direct access to the superintendent, really make sure that you're not overstepping, and you follow the same chain of command you would expect anybody else to follow. Finally, if board members observe an issue on campus that needs administrative follow-up, we talked about this, communicate it to the superintendent. Anything that anybody finds objectable, is that a word? Objectable? Any problems with anything that we've seen on this page?
I don't have a problem. I just actually had a quick question, Nikki. So I had a situation, personal situation, just like you with your own child, and I did chain of command, and I had to go all the way to district office due to some situation, right? I'm going to leave it very vague. I gave Dr. Foley a heads up that I was going to have to go to district office, just so she knew that I was acting as a parent. Would that be acceptable? Is that how you would normally handle it, just to give her a heads up so she would know?
If it got to the level, if it was going to the district office, because at that point they're going to find out anyway.
Exactly. So that's why I was, and I didn't want her to think I was going around it. So I just didn't know if that would be how you would go about it, or if I should have just went to the secondary or the elementary. It's secondary, but I went to David and had to have a conversation with David about it.
Yeah, I think you just have to tread really lightly in that situation. When you get up to, I now have to talk with administration or district office. It's the same thing. If you wouldn't give the emails of David to that parent at that point, then I wouldn't go to David. But if you would have,
I would at that point. Well, I always send everything through Dr. Foley anyway. So anything like that. But I think at that point, the proper chain was to go to to Mr. Lotzenhauser. So I was just making sure that I contacted Dawn or Dr. Foley and let her know, by the way, as a parent, I'm reaching out to Big Lots, and this is how it's gonna, and I didn't tell her why. I just said, as a parent, this is something I'm doing, just so you know.
Yeah, no, I think that's good communication.
So, Dr. Foley,
I appreciated that.
Okay,
I'm very comfortable with that.
It was more for you than probably Nikki, but I would make sure that you were okay with that communication, and I wasn't overstepping or doing something that you didn't enjoy. Okay.
No,
perfect.
no, that's what was handled perfectly, because I think, again, working on protocols and listening through this, we're also working internally in our own district office about protocols and communication and where we loop people in. It's all connected. So I appreciated that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't overstepping in some way to tell you that I was going to go to David, but okay,
No.
thank you. Thank you for making sure that I was okay there.
You're good. You were
And
good.
then I like what you said, Dawn, about when this document gets created, it's going to be so important to share it, not just with the board, but this is, letting your staff know, because it's no good to tell the board, okay, this is how we're going to do it, but then continue to let them be bombarded with, all these questions that are coming. It's their responsibility as board members. It's our responsibility to ensure that, Tiffany got out and now I'm going to admit her back in here. As board members, it's our responsibility to know what the chain of command is, to know the policy, and to follow the protocol consistently with everybody. That's our job. The superintendent's job is to make sure that teachers, community, families know what those protocols are. So making sure that it's easy and accessible to everyone, and to send out communication. Hey, as a reminder, these are the protocols. Board members do our best to educate them on a one-on-one basis, but really that comes from administration. And then the way that works together as a team is if administration says this is how it's going to go down, but the board doesn't do it, that kind of crumbles, right? If the board is sticking to it, but the district doesn't share it, you're going to continue to get bombarded. So this really is a team effort when it comes to following through on the protocols.
Well, this is kind of a theme this year in lots of different parts and pieces of functions or processes and procedures, and writing them down. So this goes nicely along with the theme of lots of processes and procedures we're working on.
Great.
And
Also-
Nikki, to follow up with your site visits, typically we schedule a superintendent visit at each school throughout the year. Board members are invited to attend. So the principals are aware when those are scheduled. We have canceled the remainder of them for this year due to COVID, and so we don't have additional people on campus unnecessarily. But because we have new board members and because we have canceled these, I think if any of the new board members, or I guess any board member, really felt the need to do a site visit, that they should schedule that through Dr. Foley. Like I said, our teachers and our principals and everyone's having a hard enough time being in person on campus with who has to be there, more or less, than have people who don't really need to be there. But the other thing we do regarding events and things like that, we haven't done it yet. We've only had one meeting. Because we're a smaller district, we typically divvy up schools between board members. So one time it was like the same board members trying to go to all these district events, and it was really difficult. So we kind of divvy up the schools. It doesn't mean other board members can't go to other school events or anything like that. It's just that way we know, hey, I need to pay attention to these school events. I need to try and get to these. So that way it's not overwhelming for anyone, but we're still supporting our schools. So that would be something we'll talk about in a upcoming meeting to kind of figure out where we are.
I like that, and I would add that I'm putting it next to the site visits, Dawn, but coming up with a event attendance plan.
Okay.
It's not mandatory that board members go to anything, and board members have different experiences. Some are retirees that have plenty of time to do that. Some are stay-at-home parents that can only do things certain times. Some work and travel and can't do very many at all. But I think it would be good to create some agreements about a minimum of what board members will do. So I know like some boards have said, okay, we know everybody's busy, but you should be able to commit to a minimum of one event a quarter. Like you will attend one school event a quarter. And then others listed the major events, because there's a million back when everything was running as normal. I mean, there could be 5, 6, 7 events a night at, depending. So coming up with what are some big ones that are important, state championship games, regional games, district-wide events, promotions, kindergarten roundup, first day of school activities, those types of things. it might be good to create a calendar of big events for the district, and then come up with a minimum, like we would like so many, then start filling in the names, and then say, hey, it looks like we haven't had anybody visit this school, or we don't have anybody scheduled to visit this school this year. Who can step up to do it? And I think that those are great things to do.
Yeah, and we typically, like I said, split up our other schools. We usually leave our high schools to, we don't necessarily pick and assign those because they do have so many events, and so many of us have high school kids. So like, we're going to those events, whether we're a parent board member and things like that. And, you know, I know when I would go to like the freshman night or the step up night, you know, I would let the principal know, like, look, I'm here as a parent. Please don't announce me. I'm here as a parent. You know, I'm literally here for my student, you know, and our kids didn't ask for us to be board members. So when we're there with them, you know, I ask them not to do that. Or in those cases, when I'm attending an event, even though my student may be participating, but it's like, yeah, I'm a parent board member kind of, then I'll let them know that's fine. You can, you know, let them know I'm here or whatever. So it's worked out really well. And that, kind of like you were saying, we were talking about 1 to 2 events per quarter, because they would typically have concerts and, you know, just different things going on. So dog, but exactly.
I think that's, would you mind muting real quick? Thank you. I think that I really encourage people to do that. And it's good for a couple of reasons, especially to make sure that all your schools are getting access, because even if you have only 4 schools, if the majority of board members live in the neighborhood of one of the schools, or the kids go to that school's naturally going to get more attendance of board members, because you're going to those events because your kids participate. I know that's been hard for me, is because I would go to one school's events more frequently because that's where my kid was in, whatever performance was happening or whatever event was happening. And so it really worked. And we have 32 schools. So I had to really ask my secretary, the board secretary, to help me. What schools have I not been to? Can you help me try to coordinate making sure that I get to at least 5 schools a year, you know, so send me events or things that are happening. Sometimes I'll ask them to set up, like, I'd like to see these 5 schools this year. Can you work with the administration to tell me them, so they can tell me what days or months are best for me to schedule something.
Nikki,
Because you do put that out there. Amy?
Yes, I think this is really instrumental with Darlene, our fabulous secretary, because she really helps us to keep tabs. And I know she's even reached out to the schools and said, you know, if there's really a special event that you want our board members to attend, please let me know. Let her be the contact person, because then Darlene can send out the calendar invites and she keeps track of us. So I really appreciate Darlene and her work in this area. And to Christina's point, we thought, Christina, because of COVID, in our spring retreat or summer, we will talk about divvying up the schools for next year, hoping that it can be more, you know, hopefully we can have more events and attend more events as board members, but to not divvy up the schools quite yet, just because we're not really attending too many events at the moment. So anyways, those are just my comments, but I really appreciate Darlene getting those information from the schools directly and then passing it on to us.
Okay, anything on site agreements or communication with the community? Any questions, concerns, anything that you feel as a board member you want to clarify? Administration, anything that you want to add in terms of requests, in terms of how the board interacts with you or your departments?
Is any of the other board members going to like the elementaries right now? Because none of my elementaries really have anything going on that's invited to parents.
No.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't wasn't ignoring them, but most of the things are not invited to parents. So I was like, I don't want to go, I won't go if it's not invited to a parent. So thank you.
This
Can I
Amy.
say something? They would love to have you guys there. They're just trying so hard to be careful. So they would love to have you there. They hate this, but I appreciate you wanting to go and being there whenever we can. But I don't want you to think it's because they don't want you there.
Mm-mm.
So,
Mrs. Richards, I completely understand. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't ignoring things. So if you see something that's important that you feel like even, I'm willing to go. I just don't want to go in because of our policy. So thank you.
Yeah, and this
thank
year,
you.
yes, thank you. I'm so glad you mentioned that because this is such a unique year, and with mitigation strategies and protocols, you'll see, and thank you for mentioning about how good Darlene is with coordinating it. She'll communicate the information out and let you know, for instance, like next week's signing day event. This is the protocols. This is what we're going to do and why we're going to do it this way. Who wants to attend so that we know who's going where. It seems to be working really good, and this is such a unique time with COVID and protocols from the unusual. So it's like we have our practices and how we'll implement them in good times and right now modified, mitigated COVID times.
And just as an aside, this is not part of a communication, but just as a suggestion, we still want to connect with our community. So if there is a teacher, so for example, I know some schools do morning announcements. If it's appropriate for the board member to just pop in and just say, hey, kids, I just wanted to let you know I'm a school board member and I'm so proud of all of you for, sticking with all this hard work, even though it's virtual. And, if you wanted to do something like that, or thank you to the staff, and all your teachers have been so great. Like if you wanted to do something like that, that's something that you can still be visible and coordinate. I know we've had a drive-through event. So we had a kinder roundup where we stayed 6 feet apart and we had masks and we had little signs, and the kindergartner parents would come through and pick up certain packets and material, and we would just wave and be there just so that we got to see the kid's face, things like that. So, if you want to create opportunities, there are opportunities. Some board members have taken tours of the campus when students aren't there. So teachers are still there, part of the contract day, but the kids are gone. And so there's very few people still on campus, and they'll come and tour the campus at that time. So I'm not saying you have to do any of that, but you don't have to feel like you can't have any contact or engage with your community during this time.
I was just asked last night from a teacher if there was going to be coffee with the board. I guess it had been brought up and kind of went stagnant, and I didn't know if that was something that we're going to do in the future or if it's in the makings.
I've heard a lot of communities that do like bagels with the board, coffee with the board. If that's something that you did in the past, I feel like that might be something that you can do virtually, but it'd be a little bit more difficult. I always give people the warning that when they do those kinds of things, to have a specific thing that you're talking about, and make sure that you coordinate with administration, that you're not speaking out of turn, right? Speaking behalf of the district on things that are not agreed upon by the district. Sometimes when we have that, people start giving their opinions on certain matters, which is basically having a discussion of board business. And even if you post that all board members are going to be there and that you're going to be, discussing that, you want to be careful, because if it's not an action item or if it's not a call to meeting order and you're all sharing your opinions about a particular thing, that could get a little bit difficult. So just make sure my recommendation for those types of events is just to make sure that they're structured around something like, we'd love to hear, we're only going to listen, we're not going to share. We want to listen to your concerns about this particular topic, or we will answer some questions, but we're going to, do it through the board president, or just whatever your protocols are for that. Just be very careful, because those things can turn into things that may cause issues if they're not structured properly. Okay, it is a little after 10. So I want to give everybody a 10-minute break. I have 10:07 here. So if we can come back by 10:17, and we will do the second half. scholarship and in the field that you want to do. That's awesome.
He was excited.
My daughter loves Barrett too. She really loves the program. Yeah, I thought it might be too much for her, but she's loving it. So
I've heard nothing but good. So I'm excited for Robbie.
good for Robbie.
I keep joking that I'm gonna have to find a job at ASU or NAU before he graduates so that I can get reduced.
Tuition waiver, right?
Right. I was like, I don't know, Tracy. I'll be at ASBA until probably another 2 more years. When he's a junior, I'm gonna have to start looking for a new job. Oh, yeah. I'm although he wants to go to Japan, I don't know if he'll go straight to college. He wants to go to Japan and maybe teach English, and he's into guitar and video and anime and like digital kind of things like that. So
wow.
Yeah, so he at first he was like, I'm never going to college, like when he was in junior high. I hate school, I'm never going to college. But now I kind of have got him around to like, okay, well, if I'm taking classes I like, then it's not so bad. All right, so we're doing actually pretty good on time. I think that one thing that's contributing to that is that you had some protocols already in place. We just haven't had them written down. So now we're kind of going through the process of just confirming a lot of the things. Some of this stuff was pre-written, so all you had to do was say, I agree or I don't agree, right? So we got through some of that. Also, you have new people, so they may not know what they don't know. So I would recommend that once this document gets drafted up, and of course, Dr. Foley does not have to stay in this format. You can cut and paste things. I'll make sure I send you the Word document version. You can cut and paste things and put it on your templates and create your own communication protocol document. But once that happens and you approve it, I would recommend going through this again in a year. And then again, every time you get new board members or a new team, just to make sure that and it'll go faster each time, because you've had it written and you'll be able to tweak it into something that works for most people. So the last bit that we have to talk about is the agenda setting, what to do before, during, and after when it comes to communication. I think that we're going to be able to do that relatively quickly. So I want to do a little bit of a game I think will be fun for us to get to know. So this is going to require the use of the chat. And are you able to chat? Does it let you choose just one person, or do you have to chat to everyone?
It's everyone. On my side, it's everyone, and then it's you, Nikki. It's either all or you.
Good. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do is this, and it might sound a little confusing. That's why I'm going to go really slow. You're going to chat just me. So don't chat everyone. Go to the drop down and send it to Nikki. And this is what I want you to do. I want you to put 3 things about you. The first thing being the most obscure, the second thing being something that people may know, and the third one being maybe a little bit even more common knowledge. So something that no one would probably guess about you would be third. I said that wrong, but 1 is common knowledge, 2 is like some people may know about it, 3 is pretty obscure. Okay. And this is called Guess Who. It doesn't have to be anything big, so don't stress out. It could just be your favorite color is turquoise. If nobody knows that, then that's obscure. Maybe easier for the new board members because people don't know you as much. But the game is called Guess Who, and what we're going to do, and I'm just going to do this for the board members because we don't have a ton of time. So the board members and Dr. Foley, I'm gonna go there. What's going to happen is once you've all typed to me privately, and I see so far, make sure you do 1, 2, 3. so that I can see what you're doing. I'm going to read them, and if you think you know who it is, I want you to unmute and tell me who you think it is.
Oops. Sorry.
And try to do it all together in one chat, because now I have people's 1s and 2s mixed up. That's fine. I can follow it, but I don't know if I'll be able to follow them all.
One is the thing everyone knows about you, right?
No, 1 would be a little bit
Oh,
more.
Okay, hold. I did it backwards.
You could just change the number in front of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Wait, so 1 is not the thing. Can you say that again? Sorry.
1 would be something that people probably wouldn't know,
Oh,
but that's fine. Just put it in. I'll probably guess, and I'll just read the questions.
I'll just change the numbers.
All right, I'm going to give 2 more minutes. Whatever's in there, or I mean, sorry, 1 more minute, and whatever's in there, we'll just go with. It'll still work. And anybody can guess who they think it is. All right, ready?
Okay.
And when you think you know what it is, just say your name so that I know who I'm referring to. Okay. Let's start with this person. This person owns a farm in Kansas.
Dawn Foley. Jill Wilson. I think it's Dawn Foley.
Yes. Jill gets a point. Darlene, can you keep track of points for me? Because I will try to get a prize sent out to the winner. Yes, Dawn Foley owns a farm in Kansas. She also plays the harp and is the mother of 2. Let's go to our next person. They love playing tennis. They worked in television.
Is this Tiffany?
Who's answering?
Jill.
Jill. Yes, Tiffany. And she has 2 children. Okay, let's go to kind of got them mixed up here. This person loves Disney.
Jill.
Jill, I was gonna say Jill.
Okay, yes. Who was the first one to say that?
Amy did.
Amy. Okay. Amy, yes. This person Jill loves Disney. She married her high school sweetheart, and she's never had a major surgery. This person played rugby in college. This person is from Texas.
Got to be Michelle.
This is
Michelle.
yeah, like this is Michelle.
All right. I don't know who that was. I think maybe
Christina.
It's Christina.
Okay. So yes, that's Michelle, and she is also a science teacher.
Process of elimination.
Yeah. This person loves teachers.
This is Amy.
Oh, yes.
That was Jill.
Okay. Amy, this person loves teachers. They have a lot of estrogen in their house.
Yeah, definitely Amy.
And they have met a lot of famous people.
Definitely Amy.
Who have you met, Amy? I want to know.
Well, my husband used to fly private jets in California out of Van Nuys. So
Oh, yeah.
I used to go stalk him at the airport whenever he had somebody that I wanted to meet or see or admire.
Yeah.
He's met far more than me. Let's put it that way.
Okay. This person is an animal lover.
Christina Reese.
Yeah, I guess I should have started the other way. This person lettered in badminton, which is also Christina Reese, and she is an Arizona native.
Wow, badminton. Good to know, Christina.
Lettered in badminton in high school.
Yeah, that's huge.
Cool.
Better believe it.
Nice. I have a bonus one, and it's a member of the administration, so I'm going to do it anyway. And I hope I read these in the right order. I lived in Alaska as a kid. I enjoy traveling to Mexico for vacation.
Is it Lots?
Shauna, it's Shauna.
Shauna. Yeah.
Shauna.
Has it right. And my daughter is on the ASU stunt team.
Yeah, Shauna.
What?
Yeah.
What is that?
It's the part of cheerleading where they do the throwing.
Ah, gotcha. She's a flyer.
She's not the flyer though. She's the base.
Oh, she's a base. Okay.
Thank goodness.
I know. I told my daughter she was interested in that. And I was like, honey, you'll probably be a base because she's like solid. She
Yeah.
wants to be a flyer. I'm like, you're already like the tallest girl in your class and you are like super buff. I don't know if you're going to be the flyer, but that's great. So this is a fun game. Just you learn a little bit more. A lot of times when we're on boards, we don't know much about their lives outside, you know, and what they're interested in. And so it's just a fun little game. I thought we had a little extra time. I would add that in. So hopefully you learned something new. And, you know, maybe the administration, if you want to throw some in, just put 1, 2, 3 all in one chat. I'll come back if we have time at the end and we'll see if we learn anything about the administrators that didn't already participate. All right. So board agendas. Well, this is going to be looking at page, it begins on page 7 of the workbook that you all have. So this is what we can expect when it comes to what should happen before, during, and after the agenda or the board meeting and the agenda, and then also kind of how you're going to get information with regards to your agenda. So on page 7, it starts with current board agenda items. The board president will meet with the superintendent, and Dr. Foley put here approximately 7 days in advance of the board meeting. How often do you all meet? Once a month? Twice a month, okay.
It depends on the month, but usually 2. If it's a unique month that has a 2-week, you know, fall, winter, spring break, it might be a one-time meeting, but usually 2.
Okay. So the plan is that for the rest of the board to know, the board president will meet with the superintendent approximately 7 days in advance of the meeting to review and approve a draft agenda. And that is usually just like, here are some basic topics that are going to cover. And we'll talk about that. That's the time where you may talk about your board calendar. So I don't know if you've all seen that, but there's an addition, when we say board calendar, it is, yes, the calendar of when the board meets, but there's also, and your administrative assistant probably is very well aware of this, of certain things that need to be reviewed and approved by boards throughout the year. And so there's a calendar that they keep as well. And the board president and the superintendent work to make sure that those things get on the agenda in the timeframes that they're allowed to. So when they meet, they're talking about, okay, what needs to be on the agenda? what's currently, what's ongoing that's always on the agenda, or something like new that that has come up or needs to be, most of the time consent agenda items are discussed at this time. Like, here's something new that just needs to be before the board. And then this is also a time where they can talk about if there's any requests for future agenda items, and if that, when they're going to do that. So 7 days in advance, they'll put it together a draft agenda. The board will use a consent agenda for items not requiring discussion. So consent agenda is an action item, which means that you can have discussion and you're voting. Action item just means that you're going to vote on it. So agendas are set up with discussion or action discussion items. So information or information only items means that there's no vote going to take place. And when you list your agenda, you have to list, these are the items that we're just getting reports and we're going to ask questions, but no votes are taking place. Separate from that is action discussion, which means that you may take action. You're not forced to take action. If you put something on the agenda, like we're going to approve, whether or not we're going to approve a resolution, you will either choose to make action or not. But if you want even the possibility of being able to vote on it, you have to list it under action item. And so those are the two separate pieces there.
Nikki, I have a question about this. So on consent agenda item, let's say there is something on consent that a board member wants to have further discussion on. Currently, if that's the case, we have removed it. We remove it from consent, and then we vote on consent, and then we talk about that item. Do we have to move it to actually vote to move it to an action item if we're going to discuss it further?
No, not necessarily. It can do one of two things. I've seen people do it both ways. I've seen them move that down to action item. So they'll approve the consent agenda minus the ones that people want to pull. And then they'll move down their thing and do information discussion. And then they'll get to there and just add it there. But most commonly, people just approve the consent agendas that had no issue and then discuss and vote separately on anything that was pulled. So either way would be fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oftentimes, I think the reason why it's more common to vote on those consent agenda items right after the general consent approval is because a lot of times staff and administration show up for those things just in case. And so you don't want to make them wait around longer than they have to. And also your community knows that that's what's going to be discussed at that time. So part of your agreements here is that any board member may ask to have an item pulled from the consent agenda to allow for discussion. Board members will notify the superintendent as soon as possible in advance of the meeting of their intent to pull an item from consent. So I don't know what your current process is, but a good practice is if you get your meeting packet and you're looking at consent and there's something within consent that you have questions about, to let Dr. Foley know, I have questions about this. Oftentimes they will try to answer your questions ahead of time. If they didn't get to answer it ahead of time, they will have it prepared for you by the board meeting. Sometimes whatever question you asked, it might have been answered, but you may choose to still pull it and have that in public meeting that you had this question about it. So I'll give you the example that I gave you earlier, that approval of the 21st Century grant and the 5 schools that we selected. That was on consent agenda because we always do these grants and we always approve the grants. It's just what schools are getting chosen each time. I pulled it from consent agenda. We approved all the other ones, and then we discussed that one and had a separate vote on it. And you don't have to have a vote on, sometimes you need, people say you have to make a motion. Like if I pulled item D, somebody would say, well, but do you want to make a motion? You don't have to have a motion before you have discussion. You can have the discussion on the item that you pulled, and then somebody can make a motion. But it is important that you put into your agreements that if you're going to pull a draft, whether or not you're going to accept moving things from consent, and we recommend that you do, and that when you're going to discuss them. So right here, it says pulled consent items may be discussed during consent on the agenda. So that's kind of to what you were talking about, Amy, that when we pull in our district, if anybody pulls something from consent, we will talk about that separate item after we've approved the other consent items.
I'd like to just stress the fact that when you have a question about any one of those items that we put it, what will happen is this will go back to one of our communication protocols. Is we'll get your question, we'll respond to you in writing, but we'll send the question you had to everyone with these were the questions we received from board members on the agenda so that you can see the answers. And that's helpful too, because even if you pull it to discuss it and we want to have a conversation publicly, we've all been aware of what you were hoping for more information of and have it prepared for you right there so that way you can make a decision, because sometimes delaying these things to the next meeting, if we needed to for any reason, could impact lots of different things. And so this is why it's helpful for us to know where those are coming from, so we'll be prepared.
Yeah, anything that could prevent you from, things are on the agenda for a reason and the time frame for a reason. So anything that you may think could cause you to not be prepared to answer or vote on that, you would want to make sure you bring ahead of time for exactly what Dr. Foley's talking about is, you may say, well, I don't want to approve this, but they were planning on that contract to go through and, they could lose it if it doesn't get done in a certain amount of time, or there's a deadline attached to it. So yes, absolutely bringing those ahead of time is a good practice.
Nikki? Nikki? Oh,
sorry.
Sorry, Amy. I was just going to say, we allow conversation during consent if people are asking questions about any consent items. Typically, the only time we pull them from consent, if potentially somebody wants to vote no on an item that they agree with the rest of the consent, but they really have an issue, or there needs to be further discussion because they're not sure that they are willing to vote for it, is typically the only time we've pulled anything off of consent. We allow questions and comments after our motion of consent, but we've pulled very few off. But it's typically when, like, either I just have to publicly make it known that I'm not okay with this item, or, things like that. So that's pretty much the only time we've pulled anything off of consent.
Well, I think you should definitely document that, because people use consent in different ways. If you're going to say, can we get a motion for consent and then allow people to discuss any item on consent, the way that my district does it is if you want to discuss it at all, you pull it separate. Like, consent is really for the things that you're just ready, that there's no discussion on. So really anything that you want to have discussion on, let's pull it off and approve everything else. Instead of having kind of a free-for-all, we're going to talk about any of the items under consent right now. That way you can address each issue individually. But if your practice is you can talk about any of the issues and you only need to pull it if you are unsure of your vote, write that into your practice.
Okay.
I'll give you an example of something that happened to me. So people also pull it certain things for acknowledgement. So for example, common personnel things is in the consent agenda, but if we know it's going to be a retirement or we're hiring a brand new administrator, those things sometimes get moved from consent so that we can take time to acknowledge. We want to acknowledge that on this particular personnel report, we are acknowledging so-and-so for their retirement after so many years of service. So we don't want people to have an anxiety attack every time something is pulled. So
Nikki, what we've done historically would be in the personnel consent, but after it was approved, what we might do is highlight. We'd like to acknowledge that we've just that with this, approval, we have just acknowledged this or highlighted this. Is how we've historically.
And that works too. So if your policy is only pull from consent, if you're not sure how you're going to vote, write that in your protocols. That's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nikki, on the same kind of off subject, but sort of, we always make a motion at the beginning of our meetings. I move to approve the agenda. Can you share an example of when somebody would actually I mean, we can't change the agenda because it's posted 24 hours. So what is that procedure for, and why does it ever come into play that somebody makes a motion to change the agenda? What is that?
Yeah. So when you're improving the agenda, it is, I'm okay with the items that are on this agenda and the order in which they are listed. Okay. So sometimes what might happen is if you did not expect, for example, say usually you have your consent, you have your information, then you have your discussion and action items. Let's say you had a lot of reports happening and then you had a discussion action item on a preschool and you weren't really expecting a lot of public comment or a lot of interest in that particular item. If you didn't want to make the people that were there to hear about that issue wait through all 6 of the department reports before they got to hear that part, somebody would say, I would like to make a motion to move action discussion after consent. And then you would get a second, and then that would allow you to do that. So that's where that comes into play.
So it's basically just moving the agenda, not changing the agenda.
The other thing that can come into play is you cannot add anything, but you could remove something. So if there's something on the agenda that you're like, I really think that this is not the time for this, or I think that there's not enough information, you can say, I make a motion to table this particular item. It still needs to get a second and it still needs to get approved. So if nobody else wants to table it, it moves forward. But that's the place that you would say, hey, I don't think we should talk about this yet. I would again give your administration a heads up that that's something that you're considering, right? Just to make sure that just to make sure that you're fully aware of any potential ramifications of moving that. And I think that's also important to note that when you're asking for additional information on items, sometimes there are board members that want to know a lot of different things, and they want a lot of different reports that may or may not be relevant, or maybe overkill, or maybe overstepping. Or maybe just is such something the administration didn't think about that it's going to take them some time to gather that information. Remembering that the board has the superintendent is the only employee and that the whole board is the superintendent's boss, it is perfectly acceptable for the superintendent to say to a board member, if they're requesting something that's going to take a lot of time or additional effort and work for their staff, to put that on an agenda and say, okay, if everybody else wants this report, if everybody else wants me to do this investigation and bring back the information, then I'll do it. Because we don't want to get into a practice where one board member can say, I want this report that's going to take 3 hours in a community, session to schedule because they want it and nobody else wants it. So I just throw that out there because people don't think about this, especially when things are going well. But what happens when there's a project that's particularly of interest to a board member and they want to be very much involved and they want all kinds of information on it? It can sometimes derail what the superintendent is already working on or the strategic plan that the board has already agreed to. So anytime that there's a question that the board president or the superintendent have a question of whether or not they should put the legwork behind that, you can always make it an agenda item to say, we're here to discuss whether or not we should pursue the request of X, Y, or Z. I just like to add that because sometimes people feel like board presidents are not gatekeepers. They're not there to say, well, that's never going to happen so long as I'm on board president, we're not having that discussion. That's not the role of the board president. The role of the board president is to ensure that things that the board wants to discuss are put on the agenda. But the board president and the superintendent are also trying to make sure that the agenda is filled with items that are aligned to and moving forward the strategic plan of the district. And that if a board member wants to derail from that, either they're focused on something that's maybe not a priority or wants a lot of extra attention, that is something that they can say, well, let's make sure that everybody's on board with this or a majority is on board before we pursue. Any questions there? Okay. So we went through consent agenda. The next part is future agenda items. While the board president and superintendent work together to create the board agenda, all board members are afforded the opportunity to request future agenda items. When requesting agenda items, the focus of board meetings should be on board work and not administrative work. So when you are requesting a future agenda item, these are questions that the board should ask themselves. Is this item to celebrate success? Is this item a policy decision? Is this something that requires a board action? Is this item needed to ensure accountability? If it's not for any of those things, then you may ask whether or not that is a necessary board action item. How and to whom and when will requests be made for future agenda items? It seems like right now you guys use that in your agenda. So if you want a future agenda item, there's a part of your agenda that says that you can speak at a meeting and say, I would like this as a future agenda. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Is that the only way future agenda items can be requested? Meaning, can a board member, if they didn't think of it that night, but the next day want to email the board president and superintendent with a request, is that acceptable?
We have allowed that. I mean, we've not been, in the past, we've not been restrictive on anything. If somebody wants to request something come to the board, they've been, like you said, we have it obviously at the end of our board meetings, but I don't know, thinking back several years ago, something did need to be somewhat controlled. And so we were a little more stringent, but everyone's been really respectful. So I don't know of anyone who's denied receiving an email or anything like that. I would like to add that in our process, that these are the two ways you can do it. But in our board policy, it is stating that it would be in writing to the board president.
So I would definitely put this into your written protocols, that if you would like to request a future agenda item, you may do that through a written request to the board president and superintendent, or during call for future agenda items in a board meeting.
That helps us too, because when we're planning like study sessions, and sometimes we have events that are coming anyhow that are, it allows us to be real strategic when we put the, and also what background information needs to be created in order to bring a comprehensive study or information item to you. I think that'll be fine. It allows us to at least plan the agenda thoroughly and intentionally, so we can say, thank you for letting us know. We will discuss, and we've been putting, you'll notice in our agendas, a target date on when we think we would address that, or we get clarification on what we're looking for and how we might address it. Sometimes too, though, it is as simple as need more information about, not necessarily an agenda topic.
Yeah, and that's fine too, because you can decide if you think that could be something that is just a board report that can go out and email to people, that is fine. So I would just make sure that in your agreements, Dr. Foley, when you're writing this, specifically how you can request, which is during the meetings call for future agenda items or by email. I also think you should write into there what the expectation is for when that will be covered. And the reason why I say that is because to your point, if a board member is asking for something that's already going to be on the agenda in 2 months, there's no need for it to, some people have the expectation that their request is going to be the very next meeting. In some communities, that's possible. They may not have a lot of business or whatever. So, and they only meet once a month. So if you make a request, it'll be covered in the next meeting. Sometimes that doesn't work out. And so having a clear expectation, and the way that our district does it is our board superintendent or our board secretary has a spreadsheet of who made a request, when, and when the expected date is. And she shares that document with the board so that we know we weren't forgotten. for a while she was keeping track, but she wasn't letting us know. So if we made a request, we weren't sure if it was coming up in a month or 3 months, or if it even made it on the list. So now she shares that list with us. But creating a protocol in writing of, we will add it to the list, you will get an expected discussion date.
The other part to this too, Nikki, is in the past, we've had a board member, and I guess this is probably more for our new board members, where there was a request for a technology update. And there wasn't a lot of background information of the request of the board member in that. It was very vague. And so when the technology update came to us, it was a hardware update. And that was absolutely the last thing that this board member wanted to hear, was a hardware update. So we got to make sure that when we ask for something, be very specific in what the board member is actually looking for in the presentation, so that it's not a lot of work for a cabinet member or somebody that wasn't what the board member was seeking. So I think that's an important part of this, as well as just making sure that we are clear in what we're seeking.
Good
Yeah,
point.
I think that
Good
writing
point.
a follow-up plan is a good idea. You don't want to get too specific and too wordy, especially if you're making a request during a meeting, because it's not agendized. So you really should, like, if I want a future request on an IT update, I should just say I want an IT update, and then Dr. Foley should come back to me and say, okay, what specifically about IT, and get that on the board, because you're not supposed to be asking any kind of clarifying questions or having any kind of discussion, because it's not on the agenda. So when you're requesting it, you really just request it. And if there's any confusion, the superintendent is supposed to go back and clarify that at that point. But I wouldn't try to get really lengthy in explaining exactly what your issue is, because then you're starting to, get into the open meeting law.
Yeah, I think it was like a technology update, and it should have been more of a technology one-to-one for our student update. Something like that is still vague, but still is specific to not just a hardware update.
Right. So I think in their protocols, Dawn, I would say that you can request future agenda items via these 2 ways. The superintendent will follow up to clarify the request. The superintendent will then add it to the calendar along with the board secretary, and share that information out with the board as to when these topics will be coming up. So like if I was writing a protocol, that's kind of what I would put into that.
And Nikki, we put with our future agenda items, anything that's pending, we put on our agenda with the intended date. So they get assigned a date, and that's on each of our agendas. So as we're having our board meetings and getting our board packets and stuff, people can see where that is and understand if it's a request that it may be out a couple times, and when a date is assigned, or we may be asking something that the administration's already working on and saying, you know what, we'll put that on future agenda items, but we're planning to bring that stuff to you in March.
Yeah.
So then they would put the March date on there. So it would still be on there because it was requested, but even though they have it already decided or things like that. So
the only thing I would add to that, and I love that you actually put it on your agenda, because it also lets your community kind of give a heads up of what might be coming down the pipe. I would just make sure that you're clear on there that it's an estimated meeting time, just so that you're not telling your public, we're going to be talking about this on this date, and then you don't.
Yeah, because that was when COVID came along, and there were things that we were anticipating and discussing or things like that. And when COVID came along, that took everyone's time. So stuff got bumped back and things like that. So that's great language to change there so that we know and everything. So
what we've got so far is a consent agenda and how to get future agenda items. Also with that future agenda items is the thing that we talked about, that if people are asking for a future agenda item that doesn't seem to make sense, because remember, what you talk about at the board table should be the focus of the board. You should know what your strategic plan is. The conversations that you have at the board table should be board operations, like the necessity things that they need the board to approve and discuss. And then all other conversations should really be focused on whatever your strategic goals are and getting updates and asking questions and providing input on those things. And so I would also put in there that language that we talked about, that if there's some question, if the board president and superintendent have question about a request, that they may put a request for future agenda item as an action item to discuss whether or not to pursue it.
Nikki, we also, when a future agenda item is requested, most of the time it's follow-up information, like on something we've approved and we want to know the outcome or information or how are we on this, and we'll clarify right then, you know, okay, is this something that you're comfortable with just having in the superintendent's weekly report, or do you really feel it needs to come as an information item before the board? And so we try and seek that clarification at that point so people know the expectation. And most of the time it's like, if it's just in the superintendent's report, that's fine. I'm just wanting to know we've approved this, where are we at with it, and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly acceptable. In our spreadsheet, that's one of the columns. Is this going to be a department board report? Is this going to be an action item? Or is this going to be just an email or a follow-up? So she does kind of have that. And that gives the people, if they really want it. So it's happened to me where I really wanted it to be an action discussion item. And it was listed as just give me a board report. And then I kept asking, where is this action discussion item? Oh, well, we just gave you that, remember that email like 2 months ago? That was the response. So you do want to make sure that the person that's requesting that understands how that's going to be answered and is comfortable with that. Okay, so let's move to page 8. Just finishing up on future agenda items. Requested agenda items will be tracked by Dr. Foley and Darlene under future agenda items in board docs. If they're concerned about the relevancy requested agenda items, the board may be requested to have the item come before the board. We just talked about that. So board member meeting preparation agreements, coming prepared. Board members will call who with questions about agenda items and supporting materials. So this is important because we want to know, do all questions go to Dr. Foley, or do you ask cabinet questions? I'll give you an example. We have what we call the big leadership team, so our associate superintendents. So it's our CFO, our HR director, our curriculum director, our assistant superintendent, and our superintendent. And our superintendent has said you can reach out to any of the BLT, any of those big ones. If it's a staffing issue, you can reach out to Justin. If it's a curriculum issue, you can reach out to this person. Understanding that that person's probably going to tell the superintendent if they need to anyway. But we're not allowed to get to lower level directors or managers or department leads. We don't go there. Others say only talk to the superintendent. So
here's kind of how we figured out that seems to work really good, and so that way everyone has access to the same information, and so that way too the cabinet is not duplicating efforts. Is that if board members have questions or anything about the agenda, going back to our beautiful, wonderful conductor, Darlene, what we ask is that the board member, she's the collector, and what she will do is say she will collect all of the questions, and we actually bring it into cabinet. So when you get your board packet and there are questions, she'll reach out and say, do you have any questions? We actually bring it into cabinet to say, okay, who's going to get what background information, what clarifying information, who's working on what. We like that by as soon as possible, but at least by the end of Monday prior to a board meeting Wednesday, because that gives us Tuesday to get it to you as quickly as possible. And again, we want to be thorough. So sometimes it takes us a minute to pull the information together around the meetings we've already got scheduled. But our goal would be to have that written communication back to everybody by the end of Tuesday so that you have it 24 hours prior to the meeting and everyone can see the questions that were asked so that everyone has access to the same information consistently. And so that is kind of something that we started implementing and it's been helpful. And one of the things we've done is when we're building the agendas and know things that are coming, put in that status report, we're working on this, you can expect this there, so that way you know what's coming, you see the agenda item, you may have more questions, we'll answer them, but that way you all have access to it. So I would say our answers would be, we would email, you'd call or email Darlene with questions so she can collect them all. And if possible, 48 hours, at least by the end of Monday. So that way we can get everything written back to everybody by Tuesday.
Okay, so my question for you is, when do the packets come out?
They come out Friday. They come out, we work hard to get our packets out on Friday by 5, so that you have the weekend to look at that, and by the end of Monday. So you'd have Saturday, Sunday, all day Monday. And at any point you saw it and had questions, you would get it to Darlene so that the cabinet could work on it.
So I would just make sure that you put that in there too, of when they can expect that, because if I didn't see that in anything that we did so far of when the packets will come out. And the reason why is we have to be fair on the other end. If you're giving them to them 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. on a Friday night, and then expecting them to spend their weekend, looking at it. So first thing Monday morning, they're responding. Is that fair? Right.
No.
So you have to make sure that you are giving your board members enough time to do that. So if you want feedback by Monday night at the latest, you may want to give them Friday, you might want to get that stuff out by Thursday night so that they have Friday to work on it. Or, if it works for everybody that, no, I like just spending time on the weekend and I'll have it Monday. But if they can't get to it till Tuesday, you just want to make sure that you have an agreement. You're telling them when you want to hear from them by. There has to be an agreement of when you're going to have all the information. Because what I've seen is that board, they'll put it up and then they'll send out things, and then they'll continue to send out things up until 24 hours before the board meeting. Mm-hmm. And then it doesn't give board members 48 hours to respond because they only got it 24 hours in advance.
Very true. One of the things we've been doing too, Darlene will start the agenda, and the board members can see draft agendas as we're building them. And what we're trying to get really good at is building 2 to 3 agendas out as we're building content for, so that you'll have a chance by that Friday to see the final document, give or take an edit or a tweak or a misnumber. It's as close to finalized as Friday. So what I'll do is I'll put together kind of our timeline of our protocol here to make sure that is, at least everyone understands what we're working toward. Yeah, and where they can access it.
Accessing the draft agendas are helpful, but there should be a drop dead date. There should be a time where, barring an extreme emergency, we shouldn't be getting any new information after Friday.
Correct.
That is fair, because I've seen it just, we were really busy, we couldn't get the report in. That's not really an emergency, right?
No.
So making sure that there's a drop dead date and time so that the board members can know, because I've seen it happen where board members will look at it Friday night and then not look at it again until the board meeting. And, oh, wait, where did this agenda item come from? I didn't know that was up. And then they feel unprepared. And when we talk about support, not surprises, it goes both ways, right? We don't want our board members to be seeing that.
Amen. I appreciate that perspective.
Dr. Foley, if it's a 3-day weekend, can we move our question date? Like this last time, it was a 3-day weekend. And honestly, when it's a 3-day weekend, Mondays are always a weird day for me because the kids are home and it just doesn't feel quite like a Monday. So I got my questions into you guys late. So if it's a 3-day weekend before that board meeting, can we move some stuff, maybe the drop dead date either on Thursday or giving us a little more time on Tuesday morning to get you those questions so we have some time to work on it, because I do like to spend those 3-day weekends with my kids. Just a little feedback.
Thank you for that feedback.
Okay, anything else from anybody?
And I was just going to say, if there is something that is added, Darlene is really good at texting the board and saying, hey, this has been added, where she just doesn't even rely on email to notify us. She texts the board members and said, this item was added to the agenda. Please make sure you go look at it or let us know if you have any questions. So I have to say that they're really good at not surprises. And then obviously there are some things, and we've been working for quite some time now on changing some habits. And it's just been a previous precedence that's been set on, there's a date that admin and everyone has to get the stuff to the board secretary. And we've really tried to make it a drop dead date, but it has still been a soft drop dead date, if you will. Yeah. So we're trying to really work on changing that behavior and letting people know, like, if it is not here, unless it's an absolute emergency, it will have to wait till the next meeting.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good expectation to have, and that really falls on Dr. Foley, because again, that's your only employee. So you can say, Dr. Foley, if your staff is not getting us the information by this time, that's something that they need to work on. And that's something that you hold accountable in the evaluation. Am I getting timely communication? Are they managing to the expectations? That's something that you can then hold her accountable to, but of course that's something that she would work on. But I love the text. I think that you should write that into your protocols, that if we have we will not change our agenda after Friday. If the expectation is, should there be a change, board members will receive a text in case they're in that situation where they already did their homework and you're just changing the assignment on them, right? Then they get that text so that they know that that's coming. I think that's good to put into your protocols for sure.
Dr. Foley?
Yes.
Is the expectation of having the board agenda completed by Friday at noon, is that just totally like a crazy request?
Well, here's the hard part is that some of the items that we have had, we're literally building as we fly because it's been COVID crisis management. And yeah, we do have a schedule where we've backed it up, but we've been trying to meet together as a team, make sure it's accurate, get it loaded. I think that you know, Darlene and I literally have it scheduled on Friday mornings to finalize one last look through before we post it to make sure there's edits and changes. And quite honestly, we've needed every last minute. My hope is that, you know, one of the things you've noticed is now, other than some timely things that have already been approved or that we need to purchase at a certain time, we've put some new protocols in where if it's a first time thing and hasn't already been approved in consent, we try and bring it to you as an information item first and then an action item the following meeting, so that you've had multiple times. There are going to be some things though in consent that were already approved. These are just the updates that won't come that way. I think we can strive to get better at it. I know the cabinet team is listening to this right now, and they know that we've been really working hard not to wait to the last minute, because one of the things I'm ensuring is nothing goes on that cabinet or goes on that agenda that we haven't thoroughly reviewed as a team multiple times. I think that's something we're really working on.
Okay, thank you.
And I know that we've had to, this is where if things didn't get done in time, there have been a couple of times we've pulled or moved an agenda item and made you aware in status because we weren't prepared or wasn't done or this had changed. This will be discussed at this meeting instead. But there are sometimes things that have to be done, like course guide or some of those different things that are just large, big things. But what we'll try to do is keep you notified in status of the work that's happening along the way on those.
Nikki, what is your timeline for your district?
We do the draft agenda, and we are supposed to, so our meetings are on Thursdays. So they try to get it to, they try to post it live by Friday. Or Monday at the latest, so that the community can see it, because that's the other thing, is you want the community to see the full agenda as well. And you know, it's something I think a lot of people struggle with. Same thing, we're in a large district as well, and I don't always think to look at the draft agenda, so I'm not really sure when the draft agenda is updated. So I think this is something that, I mean, all boards probably can work on, my board could work on too, but that is the process. Is we try to get it up by Friday. We try to get questions to our admin by Wednesday morning at the latest. And I think there's also some understanding that questions do come up. So, you know, you may not know what you don't know. Somebody may say something that makes you think about a question. And then it's just your best agenda to say, hey, I didn't have this question ahead of time, but it just came to me. If you can answer it or get back to me, that would be great. Just adding that, you know, giving the benefit of the doubt takes away the sting of, well, what about this? Did you guys think about this? You know, and then that makes them feel like, oh, shoot, we didn't think about that. Or, you know, it also tells the community like, hey, it's not that we don't know this answer, the district doesn't know this answer, it just they weren't prepared for this particular thing. So I think the way that you frame those questions, because there are times where I'm like, you know what, this just came to me, so you may not be ready to answer it, but here's my question. And usually they can answer it, but if they can't, they'll say, oh, you know what, I don't have that information with me, but I will definitely email you back. And that's more of a courtesy of how you're, you know, asking those questions.
And I think we do a really good job too when it comes to things like that. We try and frame in our board meeting, you know, I know you guys, board members sent a lot of questions and we got answers to those questions. And then we'll, you know, does anyone have anything they didn't think of? That way it tells the community, like,
Yep.
We are asking questions. We are informed. We're not just sitting there seeing something and approving it without asking questions and things like that. So we really try and share that, you know, everyone got questions in, we got responses, everybody okay, you know, things like that.
And that's good to put out there too. Just say like, we've asked questions, so much of the report is already including the answers to our questions. That does help, because you're right. Sometimes you ask a bunch of questions ahead of time and you don't have any at the meeting, and people are you just rubber stamping it? So I think if you say, you know, we have you demonstrate this or you post this, that we try to ask our questions in advance so that they can include that in their report. And then you give, is there any last minute questions that weren't previously addressed? I think that's a really good way to do it, because we also don't want, because some people feel that pressure of, I don't want to look like I'm rubber stamping, so I'm going to ask all these questions, and then your meetings get really long because everybody wants to give their 2 cents, and you don't need that either. I say be sparing in the questions that you bring before the board. So I may have 8 questions about something on the agenda, but I may ask only 1 or 2 in public meeting, because I think that the responses are necessary, either usually not for my board members, because like you, our administrator who gave me the answers gives it to everybody, but for our community as to our decision-making process. Sometimes I think that those questions are good for them to hear. All right, so we're going to go to during the meeting agreements. These are just things that we put in place. And so this is just basically, do you agree with what's on here? The president will ensure that only one person speaks at a time and that each member has an equal opportunity to participate. It's really important, especially with Zoom meetings. I've found that people wait for the chair to recognize them and speaking, so that people don't speak over each other. Specifically in Zoom, where you don't have the verbal cues, or you can't necessarily see if somebody's about to start talking. It's a good practice to get into, to allow the president to recognize you. It also allows them to make sure that everybody's voice is getting heard. So before somebody gives round 2 of their comments, making sure that everybody else had the opportunity to give their first comments. Board members will model the behaviors expected of their students, staff, and community. So if you don't already have a set of board norms, I would recommend creating some board norms around etiquette and things like that. We do have the code of ethics. It's the last page in this communications protocol. So some people choose to just put that up. We used to have posters, I think we may still have, but put that up in the boardroom. Other people have a little index card that's kind of taped to their computer or next to their computer with, you know, some of the basic agreements, like, you know, wait to be acknowledged, limit comments, you know, to allow space, whatever those are, to set those up and then make those available to people. Making sure that your procedures for public comments are available and well publicized. And a lot of boards do, and I recommend that they read every single time before public comment their expectations for public comment, to remind people of the time limits and that remind people that you can't respond if it's not on the agenda, etc. You also may want to have an agreement on what to do with comments that are relevant to an agenda item. Because if somebody comes and they want to speak on an agenda item, you can either have them talk right there during call to the public, or you can have them make their comments after that particular presentation or after, you know, when you address that item on the agenda. So you may want to, I don't know what you do currently in that situation. We just let them speak at the beginning and then proceed with our agenda, but others have chosen to have people speak at the time that they're discussing the agenda item. So whatever it is that you all are going to do.
We give them the option.
Okay.
On the sheet they give to Darlene, so they have the option.
Great. Procedures for public comment are, okay. Only the board president will respond to public comment during the meeting. So that means that they will be the ones to say, thank you for coming, or so-and-so, can you please, or Dr. Foley, can you please follow up? Of remembering that there will be no conversation. And if the person starts, sometimes they will like, well, you didn't answer my question. I want you to answer my question. The board president would be the one to say, I'm sorry, we can't answer due to open meeting law. It wasn't on our agenda, but we will follow up with you. So making sure you have one person, because you don't want people popping in and asking questions. And if the thing is on the agenda, again, going through your board president saying, you know, board president, I would like to ask the speaker a question, you know, before you just start rattling off questions. That just helps as much structure that you can provide. Make sure that your meeting is structured on the external part too. If it looks like it's a free-for-all at the dais, then it's going to be a free-for-all in your community, you know, conversations and the way that they approach. The superintendent will provide clarifying information to board member questions. Remember that you're talking about issues, not people during the meeting. So you want to be very careful about listening respectfully, not having side conversations. And that includes texting or chatting other board members. It is unfortunate that, you know, I see a lot of people on their phones at board meetings, and they may be doing nothing, but it doesn't look good. Right? It looks like you're not paying attention to the meeting. Even if you're asking a clarifying question for the meeting, it's really important because of open meeting law not to give the perception that there's additional conversation happening outside that meeting. So texting each other is a big no-no. Getting texts from community members was a big thing during COVID, where in real time, teachers and parents were messaging through Facebook, text, and other ways, board members were asking questions in real time as they were getting them. That's not appropriate. That's not equitable. And so you want to be careful with the use of your devices inside conversations. It's not just about being poor etiquette because you don't want to be talking over somebody else. It's really an ethical and legal situation as well.
And Nikki, I at one point in time with our code of conducts, because at one point in time we did have a huge issue with that. It was always asked of board members, you know, we all have families and things like that, and we have kids, and just to, you know, one, make sure that someone in our family would have like Darlene's number, that if we needed to be reached for an emergency during a board meeting. And then we would remind our board members, even though this may be the fourth time, fifth time we've seen a particular presentation or something, that, like you said, we owe it to the people who are presenting for our undivided attention. And it's not easy to get up there and present. And just because we've seen it, just because we know the information, it goes back to that. respect, that we need to respect the people who are presenting to us with our undivided attention. And at one point in time, we did have an issue with people on their cell phones. And you're right, it doesn't look good because it looks disrespectful. And then people don't know, they think you're doing something shady.
Mm-hmm. Especially if all of a sudden you have all these questions you didn't have 5 minutes ago, and then you start rapid firing questions that looks very suspect. And we want to be available to our community, but they have protocols to follow too. If they had comments that they wanted to make or questions that they had, there's a call to the public for that. They have the ability to reach out to administration for that. So you want to be very careful about setting that precedent with folks. I often will respond, like there's been meetings where I've come back to 2 or 3 Facebook messages and I saw them come through, but I didn't look at them because I didn't even want to read them. Like I didn't want to be swayed in any way, and afterwards let them know I don't check my messages during the board meeting. If you want to write in your protocols as an agreement for your team that they will be put to the side. I know that sometimes there are people that are taking care of sick children or family members, and if they need that of their, just making the understanding that it'll be on the side, or coming up with a solution of ensuring that whoever it is at home that needs to get a hold of you has access to Darlene or somebody else, whatever that is. But as much as possible, limiting that side conversation is more than just chit chat between the board members. It's some of that external stuff as well. Monitoring for compliance of open meeting law. It's really everybody's responsibility, but the superintendent, the board administrative assistant, and the board president may call that order. If you feel like open meeting law is being violated, anybody at any time can say point of order in order to interrupt, and the president can say what is the issue, and they can say, hey, I think that we may be veering off course here. Anybody can say that anytime. Be polite, point of order. President and whoever is speaking should acknowledge point of order as a pause. The president should acknowledge it. The president will then make the decision of whether or not they agree that they're going off or they're not. If the president decides that they're going to continue and you truly do feel like you're open meeting law, you at least have it in the record, and it should be anytime anybody brings up an objection should be kept in your minutes. At least there's a record that you had that say. If you feel really strongly about it, you can leave the meeting or ask for a recess. But I think just voicing your concern is usually enough to have that documented. Anything during the meeting that we didn't discuss? Okay, so let's talk about after the meeting agreements. Board members and staff will support or stay silent and not undermine the decision of the board. This is a tough one. You know, sometimes you don't get your way. You know, it may have been a split decision or a 4-1. Maybe you were the only person that didn't vote the same. It's really important to be respectful, because there are going to be situations where maybe you are in the majority and the minority you would expect the same from them. You are a team. Each one of you represent your community. That means that not one of your opinions are more important than the others. So if a majority of the board has decided to go a certain way, even if you feel strongly that's the wrong way, you should be voicing that opinion during the meeting. If you feel the need to clarify your position after, because I know some people will post after the meeting, hey, this is why I voted the way that I did. Because not everybody watches the meeting, or if you just want to make sure people know, be very careful when you're doing that. Do not say, you know, I didn't vote for this because this is good luck district, you know, in this decision. You don't want to do something like that. You can say, hey, I voted for, you know, we're going forward with this decision. I was on the dissenting side. However, I will support and the district and the board in their decision. Or, you know, this was not my intention, but, you know, this is the will of the community. I'm 1 of 5, and so I'll move forward. because your time to speak up against it if it didn't work out would be during the evaluation period, when you're doing the evaluation with your superintendent. So that's just really important. I think a lot of times people think that they're only disagreeing with the 5 people on the board, like, oh, okay, I'm just disagreeing with this other board member. But when you are disagreeing with a board member, or when you feel like that board member's point of view is totally off track, you have to remember that they represent a portion of your community. People may think like them. And so it's harder to dismiss a person when you understand that they represent your community. If you never tell a parent or a group of teachers, I don't care what you have to say because I'm the majority, don't do that to a board member. Does that make sense? Because that's essentially what you do when you treat that board member in a certain way. You're treating everybody that thinks like them or may have that same perspective. You're demonstrating how you may treat them.
Nikki, I recently saw after a community board member near us, a board member went rogue on social media, just blasting, the decision made by the board. And that's just so wrong. I mean, and she got a lot of support online, and I was like, no, that's not board ethics. And it was hard to watch the show go down. But same goes for our conversations with teachers and staff, that once a decision's made, we need to be, a united front.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you have to be a cheerleader. I mean, if you, for example, and I know COVID is big right now, and I don't know where everybody stands and where their districts are, but let's say that everybody wanted to go back to in-person, right? Except for one board member who said they didn't. And that board member goes on social media the next day and said, hey, the district decided that they're going to go in person. I still strongly believe that it's not the safest option. However, that is the will of the board, and that's what goes for going forward. That's okay. Yes, you're saying again that you didn't agree, but when you start saying they're a bunch of dumb people, they don't care about kids, that, when you start making it personal and you're attacking that, that's different. Because remember back on that we are disagreeing with issues, not people. We have to focus on whether or not we agree with an issue, not whether or not a person is good or bad. Okay, and then board member and staff will abide by confidentiality laws, especially when it comes to executive session. And if you haven't, new board members already been through BOLTS, I hope you either did it Friday, which was yesterday, or there's another one coming up on the 12th, I believe, where we go into open meeting law again and executive session again. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't been through that already, to do that, because executive session is no joke. And when it says nobody, it means nobody. There's no spousal. Some people think there's like a spousal clause, like I can share with my significant other. No, what you hear in there cannot even be told to your priest. I mean, you're supposed to just stay quiet. And so you want to be very careful with what comes out of that. Even this point was brought up in yesterday's BOLTS training. Even if it seems like common knowledge, even if everybody else is talking about it and everybody else seems to know what's going on, you are still bound by confidentiality. You still cannot talk about what was discussed in open meeting. So understanding the confidentiality laws there is so important.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
When I went to the training earlier on, I asked if, and this is I don't know if Tiffany was at the same one I was, but I asked if we were able to go back and read minutes or discuss executive session content that made recent decisions that we weren't a part of, just to have better understanding. And I was told it was okay to do that. That way we can have a better understanding of why decisions were made.
Yes, once you're an elected board member, you can have access to previous executive session minutes, but there should be some discretion in terms of, is it relevant for your current role or context? So if something happened to change the way things are happening in the district, or if something happened that is impacted the board and its operations of those kinds of things, then yes, you absolutely have things. They just caution not to go for a hunt. Like, I want to look at every executive session about every staff person for the last 5 years. like that's not going to be very helpful. But absolutely, you know, I'd like to see the last 3 executive sessions, or hey, we purchased an agreement that is going to go into effect. So say you sold a piece of land and you're going to build something on it. I'd like to know what we talked about in that one, because going forward, I'd like to understand the decisions that are being made on that property, you know, going forward. So yes, the answer is yes, you can. Once you are sworn in, you have access to those executive session minutes, but just make sure that you're doing where your intent is and that it has to do with going, you know, the work going forward.
And Nikki, just also keep in mind, typically executive session minutes are pretty general. They typically don't carry a whole lot of detail. So also, if you're looking at previous executive session minutes, just kind of be prepared for that they don't typically carry a whole lot of detail. And if it was legal advice and things like that, typically the attorney's the one who creates those minutes. So again, they keep things pretty general. And so just understand.
We record our executive session minutes, so there's a lot more in it because you don't just get the minutes. We have the recording of the executive session, but we have limits on that, and that you have to come to the district office and listen to the audio file. We don't send the audio files or anything like that. So there are some parameters sometimes with executive session minutes that they won't, you can't get them emailed to you or something. You have to actually come into the office and look at them and things like that. Because sometimes even the board secretary is not supposed to see those executive session minutes. I mean, in fact, oftentimes they're not supposed to be there. It's kind of a need to know in the situation.
That's how our executive sessions is that our board secretary is not present, and usually it is just the attorney doing the board minutes, and then she gets them to us.
Yeah.
Interesting. I took them when I was board secretary. So things have changed.
So just do that if that's the person that's doing it, and then the board secretary is bound by the same confidentiality, but others will either record the minutes so that they're recorded, and the only people that, I mean, nobody hears them. That our board secretary, for example, takes the recording. There's a media file that she has, and then I think it's protected by somebody else, but anyway, she can't listen to them. Some people have, for executive session, they appoint the vice president or a clerk to take the notes for the executive session. Sometimes the superintendent will do some of the notes for the executive session. So there's other ways to do that. There are people that do use their board admins for that, and that's their choice, and they would follow through with that. But sometimes, especially in smaller districts where they may not want, and you're talking about, say, staffing issues or things like that, they may want to limit the number of people that are in the room.
Can I follow up on what Christina said with the minutes being pretty vague? So it would, if we wanted to have dialogue with the superintendent, that should be okay to ask questions or to give like input, or would it be a board member or just the superintendent?
Well, if you talk to a board member, you could only talk to one board member. But I think the superintendent would probably be the best person to ask in terms of the what happened in the session, or to fill in any kind of blanks.
Okay.
Unless the superintendent wasn't there.
Well, that was the next question. Thank you.
I know where you're getting at, Michelle, so that's what, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we went through the agreements here. I think that we got through a lot of what you already do. It sounds like you have a lot of practices, but this is about documenting those practices. So again, I took some notes. What generally happens is I will follow up with a summary to the board of what we discussed, and I will try to capture some of these notes in there of processes that you want to outline. As you see, we didn't make any specific decisions today, but we all gave our input in terms of what we agree with or concerns that we may have. So Dr. Foley is now going to have to come up with a document that will then be put on an agenda as an action item for you all to discuss and finalize. And if there's anything in particular that needs to be added, you can postpone, approving it if you need to have a secondary meeting to discuss a particular area. But it seems like there was general consensus with everything that we went through today. Most of it was already commonplace for you all, just needs to be documented. I have nothing else for you. I do have some things in the chat, but first I want to, before we do that, I want to see if there's any last minute questions from you all. Okay. Hearing none, we're going to finish up with a couple administrators who gave us some tidbits. We're going to try to guess, and then I'm going to ask Darlene to tell me who I'm sending something to. I'll probably get Katie at the office to send maybe one of those sipper cups and a pen or something.
The hand sanitizer. We like the hand sanitizer.
Oh,
Nikki.
you know what? She did have a bunch of those spray hand sanitizer.
Yeah, I liked that.
All right.
I think Jill's the winner, so.
Oh,
I like the hand
she's making
sanitizer.
requests.
Didn't you enjoy it? I thought Amy liked the hand sanitizer at some point.
I love it.
I thought so.
Do some double or nothing. So maybe we'll do some, these next ones will be worth double points. All right. So everybody doesn't feel like it's a done deal. Okay. My grandmother lived, this person's grandmother lived to be 107 years old. This person is from Texas.
Sherry Richards.
Is that Jill?
Yes. Come on, guys. You know Sherry.
Has worked at 3 of Higley's schools.
Jill's right. Jill is correct.
The accent. I mean, you know Sherry with the accent. Come on, people, make this difficult on me.
Sherry, you've got good genes.
You're a board member.
I don't know that I want those genes.
I know.
Let's see. This person, wait, this person also owns a farm in Kansas? Wow. They are an Arizona native.
That's got to be David.
Yeah.
Who is that?
Christina.
Okay, Christina. And then they are a huge Star Wars and Pokemon fan.
Oh,
Yeah, it's David.
David. Big
Definitely.
lots.
David.
We talked about both being Arizona natives.
So tell me how I get a farm in Kansas.
Apparently, be an
You have
admin.
to inherit one. You have to inherit one, whether you want it or not.
My Madison family farm in Nebraska got sold, so we're sad.
No, we have a family farm, same way. It was my mom grew up on it, and then after she passed, my brothers and I now own it.
My mom, we're from California, but my grandmother on my dad's side lived in Kansas for a while. And so after I went to college, she and my little brother moved out to Kansas, Sublette, Kansas, which is a small little town. And it's such a culture shock. My brother's 16 years younger than me, and he grew up in rural Kansas. And so our experiences are so different. He had a mom that was a different mom than what I had, because, you know, she said after 16 years, you know, she was just tired. She had me when she was 19 and him when she was 36. So she was like, I'm just a different parent. I have less energy. But yeah, I went to visit a couple times, and I was like, you know what, why don't I just fly you out to me? Because there's really not a whole lot to see out here. But okay, I see a request here. Christina, are you a board member, by the way?
I am.
Okay. I'm going to put this back to the administration, to Dr. Foley. But there was, you know, if we want to go back to how does our board rate? Just taking some time on that as an administration, and, you know, what are your current, if Dr. Foley can maybe collect some feedback on that. It doesn't have to be specific to an individual person, but if you reach out to your admin team and get some feedback on how the board's doing in those areas and any feedback that might happen, and share that with the board.
Yeah.
And then other than that, I will, along with the summary, I will also be sending these slides. It's basically the same thing that's in the packet that you already have, but I'll send a PDF of the slides as well as a link for an evaluation. So if you can take the time, it's like 4 questions, super fast, about how this experience was for you. We're specifically looking at it because, you know, we've been doing a lot of these trainings virtually and it's not quite the same as in person, but we're just trying to make sure that these are still effective and people are still getting what they need from them. So if you can take the time to do that, I would really appreciate it. With that, I'll turn it back over to Amy if you want to conclude your meeting.
Christina's president now. I handed that off.
Christina, okay.
All right. Well, and if we don't have anything else, any other questions for Nikki while we have her?
I just asked Curtis how many watched today.
What?
I just asked Curtis how many was watching today on our.
I had asked him 2, and earlier in the thing there was 2. 2.
Gotcha.
Yep, 2.
I think one of them is my family because they were laughing when I came out for the break because they were laughing. They're like, yeah, we can watch. We're watching you.
Oh,
Okay. Great. Cheer squad.
Yes.
all right. Well, with nothing else, then I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Everyone have a good weekend.
Happy
you.
weekend.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you all.